That mysterious feeling that coiled around his heart was actually from that wisp of sword intent at the end of the open field. Moreover, that wisp of sword intent was so familiar. In merely an instant, Xianxia determined that the wisp of sword intent was shockingly exactly similar to the inheritance of the bloody damaged sword that he'd obtained. Suddenly, a sword howl resounded. It seemed as if it had awakened from countless years of slumber, and a strand of an indescribably terrifying pressure rumbled as it swept out. In an instant, the heavens and the earth dimmed while the clouds in the surroundings were dispersed. Rumble! The dense expanse of countless ancient ancestral god corpses that stood like statues on the open plains even knelt down in unison while their entire bodies shivered. The invisible sword intent was like the aura of a supreme imperial sovereign of the sword. It enveloped this expanse of the heavens and the earth, and it caused the world and everything in it to bow in submission. Bang! Xianxia felt his entire body stiffen while he faintly felt piercing pain from every single inch of his skin. Even if he circulated his entire cultivation, he still felt like his soul was about to be frozen. At this instant, he even had the impulse to kneel down and prostrate himself in worship. This sword intent was too terrifying. It seemed like an overlord, like an imperial sovereign, and like a supreme exalt. It emanated a pressure that was sufficient to deter the ages and dominate the world. If Xianxia hadn't cultivated the True Heart Sutra to the point of accomplishing the first forging of his heart energy, and if his grasp of the Sword Tao hadn't attained the first level of the Sword Emperor realm, then he would probably be unable to stand at all. The sword howl grew clearly and resounded through the 9 heavens. It surged through the heavens and the earth, and its might grew even stronger. At this instant, Xianxia felt suffocated, and he was finally able to clearly see that a sword had floated up into the sky at the end of the open field. The sword wasn't dazzling, and it was extremely ordinary instead. The body of the sword was dim and mottled, and a portion of it was even incomplete. However, its imposing aura was so vast, grand, fierce, ancient, and suffused with the primitive aura of the Manchu period. It was like a peerless imperial sovereign. Even though it was simple and ordinary clothes, it was unable to conceal its great spirit that looked down upon all things and looked proudly through the ages. As soon as Xianxia laid eyes upon this mottled and incomplete iron sword, he couldn't help but be extremely shocked in his heart. How could it be that sword? Xianxia had seen this incomplete iron sword, and it was exactly similar to that iron sword that was on the diagram of the bloody damaged sword. It was even to the extent that the oppressive aura that effused out from it was so familiar to Xianxia. In his days, he couldn't help but recall those shocking scenes. In the boundless and dark universe, a tall figure stood with his hands behind his back, and an iron sword was pierced into the ground before him. When he thought up to hear, Xianxia gasped without end. He clearly remembered that the man in the vision had once relied on this sword to sweep through the universe, crush boundless space, and annihilate countless extraordinary and terrifying figures. Could be said to be all-powerful. But didn't this sword vanish along with that mysterious man and was lost in that dark universe? So why is it here? Wait. Could it be that the Godsfall ruins was formed from that dark universe? Xianxia's heart jerked while he suddenly recalled something. This was the desolate Manchu ruins' ancient root grounds. According to legend, it was the residence of the first group of gods that were born from within the chaos of the Manchu period. After that, it experienced a world-shocking battle before being reduced to an expanse of ruins. Could that world-shocking battle be that collision between the mysterious man and those extraordinary figures? If it's really like that, then doesn't it mean that it's very likely for that mysterious man to be one of the gods that resided here all those years ago? Bang! The damaged iron sword soared into the sky and floated there silently while its might grew stronger and stronger. Moreover, its terrifying aura rumbled as it swept out like a storm. Countless ancient corpses that lay on the ground were instantly transformed into ash. This scene shocked Xianxia to the point he didn't dare continue thinking about all of this. Because those were numerous monsters comparable to universe-enlightened ancestral gods. Yet they were actually completely obliterated by the pressure emanated by the iron sword. Exactly what sort of terrifying force would be required to accomplish all of this? Xianxia instinctively intended to dodge at full strength. Yet to his shock, when this pressure swept over towards him, it actually didn't affect him at all, and it was like a gust of wind that flashed by him. He couldn't help but be stunned by this. Rumble. In the next moment, he noticed that this pressure hadn't vanished, and it swept towards the surroundings with the open field as its center. It crushed layer upon layer of space, mist, and desolate Mankuchi. Moreover, it was still spreading outwards without end. Everywhere it passed, it was actually like a storm that swept away all things, and it destroyed everything in its path. With Xianxia's formidable senses, he still couldn't help but be horrified at this moment, because in merely the time of a single breath, this pressure had swept out by 50,000 kilometers, and all the ruins, mist, and ancient ancestral god corpses on the way were completely obliterated. Moreover, it was still spreading without end. Yet all of this was caused by the pressure of merely a strand of sword intent that the damaged iron sword emanated. This had even exceeded Xianxia's imagination, and it was more than 2 times stronger than the Sky Ruin sword and Avicii Hellsword that he'd seen in the past. How terrifying would this sword be if it was completely intact? Xianxia didn't dare imagine this. In next to no time, he noticed strands of scarlet-red pearls of blood were floating up into appearance from the ground, and then they converged towards the damaged iron sword as if they'd been summoned. If Xianxia wasn't wrong, then those strands of blood pearls were probably left behind by those ancient ancestral god corpses that had been crushed by the sword's pressure, and they formed a dense mass of a few tens of thousands. It was even to the extent that these blood pearls even frequently flew over from afar, and all of them surged towards the damaged iron sword as if they'd been summoned. Could it be that it urgently required energy upon awakening, so it emanated this pressure to kill those ancient ancestral god corpses in order to replenish itself? Xianxia was surprised and bewildered, but in next to no time he'd repudiated these thoughts of his, because he noticed to his shock that those blood pearls surged into the mottled surface of the iron sword and were branded on it. They transformed into a strand of murderous energy that accumulated within it, and it seemed as if they caused the iron sword to possess a strand of vitality. The bloodied, damaged sword's imposing aura grew even stronger, and it shook the surroundings. This was the true appearance of the bloodied, damaged sword. It was exactly similar to the diagram Xianxia had seen from the river diagram fragments. So those ancient ancestral god corpses were actually able to resurrect because they absorbed a trace of the bloody, damaged sword's aura. Yet now, the damaged sword has awakened from its slumber, and it has started to reclaim the energy that belongs to it. In an instant, Xianxia came to a complete understanding. He finally understood that the reason those ancient ancestral god corpses were able to resurrect countless years ago and exist until now was actually because of the bloody, damaged sword's aura. Just think about it. A strand of blood was able to cause an ancient corpse to possess a strength comparable to a universe-enlightened ancestral god, and this obviously showed how terrifying the might of the bloody, damaged sword was. Before Xianxia could continue deducing, a sword howl suddenly resounded in the depths of his mind, and then the river diagram fragments droned and started trembling. At this instant, Xianxia was slightly dazed. He felt a wave of piercing pain fill his field of vision, and in the next moment he instantly lost consciousness. Right at this moment, the bloody, damaged sword that floated in midair in the distance had suddenly vanished into thin air as well. I never expected that kid would actually be so slippery. We've actually been unable to notice his tracks until now. Continue the pursuit. That was an 8th grade ancestral Dao route and 4 7th grade ancestral Dao routes that he took, and we must seize it back and deal with that kid before the Genesis ancestral route appears. Damn it! That kid seems to possess some sort of secret technique, and he'd able to avoid being noticed by the ancient ancestral god corpses. If we continue pursuing him like this, then when would we be able to catch up to him? Don't worry, he won't be able to flee for long. Within the boundless mist, Luo Xiaonong, Di Jun, and the others were teleporting at full speed, but their expressions were slightly gloomy. After the time for an entire incense stick to burn, they'd actually still been unable to notice Xianxia's tracks, and it would be fine if it was merely like that. However, to their annoyance, They frequently suffered the assault of ancient ancestral god corpses all along the way, and it was extremely unbearable and severely impacted the speed they pushed forward at. At this moment, even Luo Xiaonong felt extremely depressed, let alone that others. What an interesting prey. If I capture him, then I'll definitely play with him properly. It'll definitely be extremely exciting. Dijun chuckled happily at the side instead. He licked his lips that were scarlet red as if they'd been covered in lipstick, and his voice was feminine and sharp. Even though he was smiling, yet it caused a chill to run down the spine of others. Even a figure like Luo Xiaonong couldn't help but feel a wisp of a chill run down his spine. He was clearly aware that once this madman, Dijun, started to play, then the consequences were extremely severe and terrifying to Dijun's enemy. It would absolutely be an experience of utter misery, and that person would be unable to escape even after suffering all sorts of humiliation. Rumble. Right at this moment, a wave of terrifying rumbling suddenly arose from afar, and it seemed like an army was charging over from the dense mist in the distance. Luo Xiaonong's eyes focused, and then he suddenly stopped moving and said in a stern voice, "Shit, retreat." Everyone was stunned. Another group of ancient corpses? Idiots! Flee! Quickly! Luo Xiaonong turned around and intended to flee, yet he noticed all of the others acting in such a way, and he couldn't help but snap at them in a stern voice. His expression was solemn, and it caused the hearts of the others to instantly tremble. Even though they were unable to figure the situation out, they still instinctively turned around and fled along with Luo Xiaonong. Swish! Space fluctuated as they retreated at full speed. On the way, some of them couldn't refrain from turning around to take a look, and the scene they witnessed instantly caused their scalps to go numb while their souls almost left their bodies. An indescribable and terrifying pressure was moving like a sharp, invisible blade, and it sliced space apart and crushed the desolate Manchukuo. Everywhere it passed, it left a scene of destruction in its wake. It was too terrifying. It was like the sickle in the hand of the god of death was reaping lives, and it terrified them to the point there was no need for Luo Xiaonong to urge them on before they utilized all their strength to flee. What exactly is that? How terrifying! That aura is 10 times more terrifying than when my clan's ancestor flares up. It's simply lethal. After 2 hours passed, Luo Xiaonong and the others had finally fled from the area which was covered by desolate Manchukuo, and they returned to the area of the ancient root grounds that they were familiar with. At this moment, their faces were covered with surprised and bewildered expressions. Many of them were even gasping for breath, and they seemed as if they'd taken a walk through the borders of life and death. All of them were looking into the distance. Up until this very moment, they still hadn't figured out exactly what had happened. Rumble. Suddenly, the space in the distance exploded into pieces, and then desolate Manchukuo rumbled as it swept over. That strand of extremely terrifying pressure had actually swept over once more. Damn it! It actually hasn't stopped. Luo Xiaonong was shocked in his heart as he cursed furiously, and then he led the others to continue fleeing towards the distance. The heavens and the earth shook while the sky dimmed. At this moment, the entire ancestral root grounds was suffused by a strand of terrifying pressure that swept towards the surroundings like a gale. It wasn't just Luo Xiaonong's group. The other cultivators in the ancestral root grounds had been alarmed as well. What's this? What a terrifying pressure! Why has such an unexpected event occurred? Flee! Quickly! The cultivators couldn't be bothered to continue searching for ancestral roots. All of their expressions changed as they dodged towards the distance, and every single one of them felt extremely shocking and didn't know what had occurred. But in next to no time, they noticed that the terrifying pressure which surged over from all directions had actually moved to converge towards the center of the ancestral root grounds. Rumble. Suddenly, the sky dimmed down. Thunder and lightning rumbled while dark clouds densely covered the sky, and thick, large, and zigzagged bolts of lightning danced wildly through the heavens and the earth like silver serpents. The rumbling of thunder was like the shouts of fiend gods and like the drums in the hands of heavenly gods. It caused all the cultivators in the surroundings to feel horrified. This phenomenon was extremely unusual. After an entire 10 minutes passed. Bang! A wisp of shimmering violet light shot into the sky from the center of the lightning storm, and it emanated a strand of a grand, dignified, and ethereal aura. It even emanated waves of spiritual chanting, and it was like the tune of the Grand Tao was resonating with it and the gods of the Mancha period were reading scriptures. All of this drifted through the heavens and the earth, and they revealed a solemn force that struck directly at the heart. For a time, the originally dark sky was suddenly tainted violet in color, while the originally violent lightning had transformed into strands of zigzagged divine rays of light, and they stood on guard around the violet light that shot into the sky. The gale, the terrifying pressure, and the horrifying flashes of lightning had vanished from the heavens and the earth, and only an expanse of extreme silence remained. At this moment, violet light had shot into the sky while rays of lightning stood on guard around it, and chanting that sounded like the sound of nature drifted through the air. It revealed an aura of that was peaceful, solemn, divine, and grand. At this moment, all the cultivators in the surroundings were stunned. Just a moment ago, it was like the end of the world was arriving. Yet at this moment, such a divine scene had appeared, and it caused them to feel slight disbelief. Violet light charging into the sky. Could that be the place where the ninth-grade Emperor rank ancestral Tao root resides? Someone spoke with a trembling voice. The ninth-grade Emperor rank ancestral Tao root? Right. Only the appearance of such an unequaled ancestral Tao root would cause the rise of such grand phenomena. But, according to the deductions provided to us, wasn't the Genesis ancestral root supposed to appear a few days from now? Why has it appeared in advance now? It was only a deduction, and it can't be fully believed. Since the ancient times until now, the appearance of the Genesis ancestral root was never constant. Otherwise, how could it possibly be considered to be something that can only be chanced upon by luck? However, the time the Genesis ancestral root appeared this time is slightly strange indeed. In the instructors provided by the seniors of my sect, they'd never mentioned anything about that terrifying pressure. It's even to the extent that such phenomena of the heavens and the earth is unprecedented as well. Ignore all of that and quickly take action. Now that such a fortuitous encounter has appeared in advance, it would be a pity if we missed it. Amidst waves of animated discussions, the cultivators scattered around the ancestral root grounds had practically simultaneously rushed from all over the ancestral root grounds towards the area where the violet light shot into the sky. It wasn't long before they had no choice but to stop, and their expressions were even slightly surprised and bewildered. When they arrived an entire 500 kilometers away from that beam of violet light, there was an invisible force field that lay before them, and it caused them to be unable to traverse it at all. Some refused to accept this and tried to traverse it by force, yet they were blasted down by a bolt of violet lightning that appeared out of thin air. Even if they were top-rate existences amongst domain-enlightened spirit gods, they were actually unable to resist these bolts of violet lightning at all, and they were struck to the point of coughing up blood as they staggered back. Moreover, if they didn't dodge in time, then they would have almost lost their lives. This scene instantly caused many cultivators to erupt into an uproar. The excitement in their hearts receded greatly, and their eyes carried a wisp of a solemn expression as they gazed at the violet light in the distance. Such an unequaled fortuitous encounter really isn't so easy to obtain. However, they were unwilling to stop here just like that and watch helplessly. Bang! Suddenly, a blood-red curved blade soared into the sky and shot down ferociously. It was Jun. However, before the curved blade could even approach it, a wisp of violet lightning appeared once more. Bang! It forcefully blasted the blood-red curved blade to the point of trembling violently and being blasted away. Moreover, Jun even suffered backlash from this, and his figure staggered back uncontrollably by a few steps while his countenance turned livid and pale. At this moment, everyone was completely stunned. Jun was a spirit god exalt ranked at the 12th position on the Domain Enlightened chart. Yet even he was unable to pass through the force field at all, and this obviously showed how terrifying it was. Humph! I don't believe I'm unable to destroy you. Jun's face sank. He gritted his teeth and was just about to continue when he was stopped by Luo Xiaonong, who stood at the side. There's no need to continue. The Genesis ancestral root hasn't appeared yet. So, not to mention you, it would be impossible for us to pass through even if everyone here joined forces. Luo Xiaonong's gaze locked onto the violet light in the distance as he spoke in a low voice. Don't forget that the Genesis ancient root doesn't just contain a single violet ray of light. According to the records in the ancient books, it's accompanied by the Violet Sky Tao Palace. That place is the residence of the emperor of those innate gods that were born from the chaos of the Mancha period, and a true emperor rank ancestral Tao root can only be born there. The others in his group came to an understanding upon hearing this. But right after that, Dijun frowned. Could it be that we have to wait here bitterly like this? A wisp of a secretive smile arose on the corners of Luo Xiaonong's mouth. If my deductions aren't wrong, then the Genesis ancestral root will appear at any time in the next 2 days. So what if we wait for this little bit of time? In this area, violet light shot into the sky. Rays of lightning stood on guard in the sky, and strands of the faint sound of chanting that sounded like the tune of nature drifted through the surroundings. On the other hand, an area of 500 kilometers with the violet light at its center was enveloped by an invisible force field, and it isolated all the cultivators from the violet light, causing them to be unable to approach at all. At this moment, it wasn't just Luo Xiaonong's group that was nearby. For example, Lu Wuhan's group, Gongye Zhifu's group. At this moment, numerous groups had already arrived. They'd similarly determined all of this, and they were waiting calmly here. No one was willing to leave. Even if it was those cultivators whose strengths were inferior to Spirit God Exalts, they were unwilling to miss this unequaled fortuitous encounter. Once the Genesis ancestral root appears, then extremely intense conflict is unavoidable. Yet now, where is Qianxia? Shen Tianran's fine and ink-black brows knit together, and she was slightly puzzled. This phenomenon of the heavens and the earth was so vast, so logically speaking, Qianxia would absolutely come over if he noticed this scene. Could something unexpected have occurred to him? Yu Qiujing's brows raised. Since he let bygones be bygones with Qianxia, he'd accepted Qianxia and taken Qianxia to be a friend. At this moment, when he saw Qianxia still hadn't arrived now, he was extremely worried in his heart. The others went silent when they heard this. Qianxia's combat strength was so formidable that he'd long since established an extremely high status in their group. It was even to the extent that even Lu Wuhan acknowledged his inferiority to Qianxia. If Qianxia wasn't present when they fought for the 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Tao root, then it would undoubtedly affect their overall strength. Let's wait a while longer. Hasn't the Genesis ancestral root not appeared yet? It's fine so long as he's able to return in time. Lu Wuhan smiled as he spoke, yet he was slightly worried for Qianxia in his heart. I wonder where that fellow went now? Shinta Yenran bit her moist and plump red lips, and she complained while feeling slightly worried. At this moment, Qianxia was slightly bewildered and extremely shocked. A dark, empty, and soundless universe lay before him, and only an ethereal figure that practically seemed to not exist sat cross-legged at the center of this universe. His entire body was suffused by strands of seemingly ethereal light, causing others to be unable to see his appearance clearly. However, Qianxia discerned with a single glance that he was the owner of the iron sword, because that figure's aura was powerful like the ages, distant like the heaven Tao, and primitive like the source of the Tao. When looking at him from afar, it caused Qianxia to be unable to help but arouse the feeling that he was tiny like an ant. Even though that figure was sitting cross-legged without moving, he seemed to have transformed into the overlord of the universe. He was too formidable. Even if Qianxia had already attained perfection in the domain enlightened spirit god realm now, his entire body was still stiff as if covered in ice when he faced this figure. He didn't know how he'd arrived here. Not did he know what he would encounter next, so he couldn't help but feel slightly anxious. Fortunately, his years of experience and abundant knowledge allowed him to instantly determine that even though this figure was the owner of the iron sword, it wasn't an actual person, and it was an existence formed from a strand of wool brand. He'd experienced similar situations when he met his eldest senior brother Wuxia, and when he met the sovereign sex master above the 33 levels of the sovereign realm. All of them were just wool brands at the time. Obviously, the figure of the iron sword's owner that sat before him was the same as well. Swoosh! Right when Xianxia's thoughts were running wild, that figure that sat cross-legged there suddenly opened its eyes. In an instant, that gaze was like a bolt of lightning that split apart the chaos, and it pierced Xianxia's soul to the point of trembling with terror. At practically the exact same time, the river diagram fragments in his mind suddenly droned and trembled, causing him to feel as if he'd attained sudden enlightenment while inexplicable comprehension arose in his heart. Xian, the seventh comprehender of the river diagram, the first innate god that was born from the chaos of the Manchu period, and the master of the Manchu secret realm. So, the owner of the iron sword is called Xian. Xianxia was shocked in his heart. He wasn't shocked because he'd found out the name of the iron sword's owner, and it was because the iron sword's owner was actually the seventh comprehender of the river diagram. What did this mean? It meant that all those years ago, Xian had comprehended the profundities of the river diagram just like he was doing now and had stepped foot onto the peak of the Grand Tao. On the other hand, there were an entire 6 cultivators that had obtained the inheritance of the river diagram before Xian. In the past, Xianxia had never imagined all of this, because in his knowledge, he only knew that his master, the master of Oracle Mountain, Fuxi, had relied on the river diagram to comprehend the profundities of the workings of the heavens all those years ago, allowing Fuxi to step foot onto a supreme path towards the Tao. Xianxia was shocked and slightly speechless. If Xian was the seventh comprehender of the river diagram, then what number am I? After that, Xianxia laughed endlessly with self-ridicule in his heart. The river diagram he'd obtained was still in fragments, and he still hadn't gathered the complete river diagram, so how could he even be ranked amongst them? At the same time, because of the words master of the Manchu secret realm, it allowed Xianxia to confirm his thoughts from before. This Xian, who was the first innate god born from the chaos of the Manchu period, was definitely a god that had once resided at the desolate Manchu ruins according to the legends. In other words, the desolate Manchu ruins that lay outside the god burial ocean and the ancestral root grounds that contained numerous fortuitous encounters were Xian's homeland. When he realized this, Xianxia couldn't help but sigh with emotion. No wonder the mysterious characters for desolate and ruins appeared on the river diagram fragments, and no wonder I obtained the inheritance of the bloody damaged sword upon arriving at the desolate Manchu ruins. Turns out that all of this is because of this seventh comprehender of the river diagram that's sitting before him, Xian. It was even to the extent that Xianxia realized that since it wasn't just the characters for desolate and ruins that had appeared on the river diagram fragments, and since the characters for desolate and ruins allowed him to meet Xian by chance, then who did the remaining ancient characters represent? Were they the other 6 comprehenders of the river diagram before Xian? Or perhaps there were other secrets hidden in the river diagram. Fellow Taoist, you've arrived. Right when all of these thoughts arose rapidly in Xianxia's heart, Xian, who sat cross-legged before him, had spoken abruptly. His voice was warm, clean, and like a clear spring that caused one's heart to feel tranquil. Xianxia was stunned, and then he cupped his hands silently. He knew that this was a strand of wool brand that Xian left behind, and it didn't possess intelligence or a consciousness. So he just had to listen. Unfortunately, for the sake of pursuing the ultimate path of the Tao, I'm unable to meet fellow Taoist in person, and I've only left everything I've learned, everything I've thought of, and everything I've comprehended here. This is the mission of every single comprehender of the river diagram. The moment we truly see through the meaning behind the ultimate path, it would also be the time we have to leave, whereas everything we have learned has to be left behind in order to guide the next and pass down our legacy. If fellow Taoist is able to step foot onto the ultimate path of the Tao one day, then fellow Taoist will naturally have to do as I did. You'll have to leave all your ultimate techniques, pass down the fruits of your Tao, and prevent the legacy from ceasing. Xian's entire body was suffused by strands of ethereal light, while his voice was warm and clear, and it resounded through this dark universe like a gurgling spring. Xianxia grew more and more shocked as he listened, and he finally understood why he was able to obtain the inheritance of the bloody damaged sword. Before he could make any reaction, Xian suddenly stood up and smiled as he said, "Fellow Taoist, take care of yourself." As he spoke, Xian stretched out his finger and pointed it at the center of Xianxia's forehead. Xianxia felt his mind drone, and it felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. It caused his vision to go blank, and he instantly lose his senses. In the next moment, Xianxia felt as if he'd fallen into a dream. In the dream, strand after strand of sword chi whistled through the air. They sometimes seemed to surge like an ocean that crushed everything before them. They sometimes flowed without a trace like light and moved undetected. They sometimes formed a balance between yin and yang, causing them to become immovable by all things. All of these strands of sword chi were extremely terrifying. They were filled with the might of an imperial sovereign and controlled the divine Tao of the universe. They whistled and surged in a boundless and dense mass, and they filled every single inch of space within his field of vision, causing him to be unable to lay eyes upon all of them. After that, all of these strands of sword chi suddenly changed their direction, and they attacked him in unison. It was like a storm of swords was descending, and it was an astounding scene. This caused Xianxia's heart to palpitate, and he intended to flee, yet it was already too late. In the next moment, his entire body was drowned beneath the sword chi. It was at this instant that Xianxia suddenly woke up, and he opened his eyes. The scene from before had vanished, and it caused Xianxia to be unable to help but let out a long sigh of relief while his eyes still carried a wisp of horror. That scene that occurred in the dream from before was truly too terrifying, and if it really occurred in reality, then Xianxia absolutely didn't dare guarantee that he would be able to survive it. Woo, Xianxia was still standing on that open field. Waves of cold wind whistled by him, and they emanated a bleak rustling sound. Only the dense expanse of ancient ancestral god corpses had vanished, and that bloody damaged sword at the end of the open field was gone as well. As he gazed at the scene before him, Xianxia was dazed in his heart. If his mind wasn't clear right now, he would have almost thought that everything he experienced just now wasn't real. Xianxia suddenly noticed that the bloody damaged sword had suddenly appeared within his sea of consciousness, and it was floating there while emanating a strand of obscure fluctuations. Bang! Right at this moment, that familiar feeling he felt when he experienced the dream from before surged over like a torrent, and it surged throughout his heart. It was a form of sword insight. It was different from the mysterious sword of the heart, yet it seemed as if it was cut from the same cloth as the mysterious sword of the heart. The only difference was that it possessed specific moves. A wisp of sword chi appeared. It was vast like an ocean, solid like a cliff, and filled with a powerful force that crushed all things. Comprehension arose in Xianxia's heart. He was clearly aware that the profundities of this move were shockingly similar to the calm before the storm that he'd created himself. However, this ocean cliff style carried a thoroughly tempered and all-powerful aura. Profound heart sword technique, ocean cliff style. Swoosh! Another wisp of sword chi appeared. It was like a flowing ray of light that moved without leaving a trace behind. It seemed to be impossible to discern or capture, and its speed was unbelievably swift. However, it wasn't so mysterious and ruthless like the Vorpal strike, and it had an ethereal and indistinct aura instead. Profound heart sword technique, flowing light style. During the next period of time, another 2 different sword moves had appeared successively. One was precise like how a butcher dismembered an ox, and it was focused and swift to the limit. It was called the dismemberment style. The other was a perfect barrier of the sword that had no weaknesses to exploit. Its defensive ability was so formidable that it was like a rock in a turbulent current. No matter how the current surged, it remained immovable, and this move was called the impeccable style. At this point, the powerful and vast comprehensions of the sword Tao had transformed from complicated to simply, and they'd converged into 4 completely different sword moves that were grasped by Xianxia. This inheritance in the sword Tao was called the profound heart sword technique, and it was from the 7th comprehender of the river diagram, Xian. It was a form of supreme sword Tao that he'd tempered throughout his life. If the true Heart Sutra and mysterious sword of the heart that Xianxia obtained from the diagram of the bloody damaged sword were 2 cultivation techniques that supplemented each other, then the profound heart sword technique he obtained now had converged Xian's lifetime experience in the sword Tao. It was the epitome of a masterpiece in the sword Tao. In terms of preciousness, It was an unequaled sword scripture that could arouse the greed and covetous feelings of any sword cultivators in the world. At this moment, Xianxia had fell completely into a state of instant enlightenment. His entire body was enshrouded by sword insight, and it was like he was covered in a layer of hazy divine radiance. It caused his aura to seem mighty like a god and supreme like an imperial sovereign. His cultivation in the Sword Dao had already attained the first level of the Sword Emperor realm since a long time ago. Now, when he obtained the profound heart sword technique, it caused his understanding of the Sword Dao to rise a level higher, and it was faintly showed signs of breaking through into the second level of the Sword Emperor realm. Under the effects of such comprehension, even the vital energy in Xianxia's underwent a transformation as well, and it became even more complete, perfect, and translucent. If it continued like this, then it was extremely likely for him to capture the critical factor to advance into the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm. On the other hand, divine energy surged in the universe within his body. It seethed like lava and emanated blazing and dazzling divine radiance as it surged without end. Moreover, it ceaselessly expanses, and it had already attained a full state and was on the verge of seeping out of his body. An ordinary cultivator would have probably grabbed onto this critical moment a long time ago, and that cultivator would have refined and absorbed an ancestral Tao root to charge into the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm at full strength. However, Xianxia didn't do that. Even if he already possessed an 8th-grade ancestral Tao root now, he didn't have any intention to charge into the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm now. After all, once one attained a cultivation like his, one's requirements towards one's own path towards the Tao would become even harsher. One sought perfection and flawlessness. So, if he utilized an 8th-grade ancestral Tao root as his foundation now and broke through, then he would have a trace of a flawed feeling in the end. One day later, Xianxia awoke from his state of instant comprehension. The blazing divine radiance that covered his entire body was suddenly withdrawn into his body, and he recovered his extraordinary and indifferent bearing from before. It was also at this moment that a voice suddenly resounded from the bloody, damaged sword in his sea of consciousness. Fellow Taoist, when you attain the 9th level of the Sword Emperor realm, you'll be able to unlock clues related to attaining the ultimate path of the Tao from within this King Xian sword. I hope I'll be able to meet fellow Taoist in the future. Take care. The voice was calm, clean, and gradually vanished into silence. The ultimate path of the Tao. Xianxia took a deep breath, and he muttered, "I will." It really is him, Master. I finally waited for this day to arrive. Outside the ancestral root grounds and before the ancestral root temple, the temple guardian that sat cross-legged on the altar before the temple suddenly opened his eyes. His extremely aged face was suffused with a wisp of a complicated expression, and he seemed to be gratified, excited, and sighing with emotion. After that, he stood up, and he looked at the temple before him while a wisp of a deep glow flashed in his eyes. It's about time for the Genesis ancestral root to make an appearance as well. His aged voice drifted through the heavens and the earth, and it was like a prediction. Bang! The ancestral root grounds. At the place where the violet light had shot into the sky, and the cultivators who were waiting her patiently suddenly noticed that the ground beneath their feet had started to tremble violently. In an area of 50,000 kilometers, the ruins crumbled, rocks shot into the surroundings, and horrifying rifts split open on the ground and stretched towards the distance. On the other hand, at this moment, the rays of lightning that stood on guard around the violet light were suddenly suffused with a bright glow, and they transformed into a matchlessly large vortex that revolved madly. The violet light just happened to seem as if it was standing towering at the core of this vortex. At this moment, a rain of light suddenly showered down from the surroundings of the violet light. It was brilliant, vast, filled with divine light, and extremely grand. What's that? Could it be that the Genesis ancestral root is about to appear? It's definitely that. Everyone, quickly prepare yourselves. We'll take action at the first possible moment, once the Genesis ancestral root appears. When they witnessed this shocking scene, all the cultivators in the surroundings were shocked, and then their gazes couldn't help but be suffused with a wisp of excitement and happiness. They had a feeling that the Genesis ancestral root was really about to appear. Rumble. The ground quaked even more violently while a strand of an oppressive and obscure force had suddenly suffused the heavens and the earth. After that, with the violet light as its center, the rain of light and divine radiance emanated by it actually converged together and gradually formed the shape of a blurry palace in space. The violet light seethed while a rain of light and divine radiance poured out from it. At this moment, they intersected together and formed the shape of a place in space. All the cultivators in the surroundings were stunned, and they were shocked in their hearts. This scene was simply like a divine miracle happening before their very eyes, and it was grand and brilliant to an unimaginable degree. No one spoke. All of their gazes were focused towards the sky without blinking at all because they were deeply afraid of missing even the slightest detail, as it would cause them to have regrets from their entire lives. After a short moment, under the gazes of everyone present in the surroundings and amidst the blazing divine radiance in the surroundings, that palace formed from the divine radiance and the rain of light had finally taken form. It lay across 4,000 kilometers of the sky, towered into the 9 heavens, and was extremely imposing. It was completely seething with dazzling violet divine radiance, and it carried a solemn, vast, and oppressive aura of an imperial sovereign. It was like the residence of an ancient imperial sovereign, and it possessed a form of completely natural and powerful karmic luck that guarded it and looking down proudly onto the world. For a time, the sounds of Buddhist chanting and reading scriptures drifted through the air, and a rain of light descended while accompanied by 1,000 strands of auspicious mist. They suffused the surroundings of this palace in the sky, and it seemed divine to the extreme. The Violet Sky Tao Palace. This is probably the place of legend where the innate gods born from the chaos of the Manchu period had resided. The Genesis ancestral root resided within it, and only such a supreme and profound existence could produce a supremely precious treasure like the 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Tao root. The hearts of everyone in the crowd surged with excitement while their eyes glowed, and they recalled too many legends and rumors related to this palace and the Genesis ancestral root. OM. Right at this moment, a strand of a unique and indistinct tune of the Tao suddenly resounded through the heavens and the earth, and it shook without end. It was like the sound of the morning bell. Every time it shook, it caused the aura in this expanse of the heavens and the earth to be purified a bit more, and the pressure that filled the surrounding space grew slightly stronger. When this tune of the Tao resounded for an entire 9 times, the entire palace rumbled, and then a door opened abruptly. A dense rain of light showered out from it, and it caused others to be unable to see through to the secrets that lay behind the door. After that, a white jade staircase floated up into appearance before the door, and it lowered level by level to connect to the ground. At this point, everything returned to deathly silence. Charge! A cultivator was unable to restrain himself since a long time ago. So, when he witnessed such a scene, he couldn't refrain from charging forward towards the white jade staircase. Swish! It wasn't just this cultivator alone. At this moment, at least 100+ cultivators had set out in unison, and all of them yearned to charge into the palace at the first possible moment and search for great fortuitous encounters within it. Rumble! However, before they could even approach it, a strand of terrifying violet divine radiance surged out into appearance in the surroundings of the staircase, and it was like an imposing dragon that swept through the surroundings. Bang! 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 In the next moment, numerous figures was blasted flying like kites that had been cut off from their strings, and they coughed up blood while they crashed to the ground and let out endless shrill cries. This scene instantly caused the other cultivators who were burning with eagerness to be shocked, and it was like they'd been doused by a pail of icy cold water, causing the excitement in their hearts to reduce greatly. What a bunch of ignorant fellows! How could the Genesis ancestral root possibly be a place that just anyone can enter? All of you are dreaming of obtaining such a fortuitous encounter with only this little bit of ability? That's simply laughable to the extreme. A wave of cold laughter resounded, and it was D. Jun who'd spoken out with ridicule after he witnessed all of this. The expressions of many changed indeterminately, yet none dared to argue with D. Jun. However, some refused to accept this, and they moved carefully towards the staircase. Yet, without exception, all of them were blasted away by the terrifying violet divine radiance, coughed up blood as they fell to the ground, and let out shrill cries without end. Everyone couldn't help but feel astounded by this. After all, they were top-rate existences in the domain enlightened spirit god realm, yet they weren't even able to step through a door now, and this was simply impossible to accept to them. For a time, the atmosphere was slightly dreary, because they were facing such a great fortuitous encounter yet just happened to be unable to enter the place the fortuitous encounters resided. This was simply torture to them. Suddenly, Luo Xiaonong stood out and said indifferently, "We mistook something before this. Only spirit god exalts are able to step foot into a place like the Genesis ancestral root." As soon as these words were spoken, it was instantly like judgment had been passed, and it made many cultivators in the surroundings to extinguish the last traces of hope in their hearts, causing their expressions to dim down. Amongst the people present in the surroundings, most of them weren't spirit god exalts, and this meant that most people were unable to fight for this fortuitous encounter. The impact of such a blow to them was obvious. "Dijun, you come with me, and the others will stay behind to receive us when we return," Luo Xiaonong instructed casually before he walked towards the staircase with his hands behind his back. "Ha ha ha, that's fine as well. At least we'll be able to avoid having too many flies in there because it would be quite troublesome to exterminate them." Dijun roared with laughter and spoke with a sharp and feminine voice, and it caused the expressions of many cultivators in the surroundings to change. Flies? When had they ever been humiliated like that? But in the end, they didn't dare say anything about it even if they were furious. Because it was Dijun and existence at the 12th position on the Domain Enlightened chart, and he was a renowned madman in the Imperial region. No one would be stupid enough to offend a madman like this who possessed both status and strength. Not to mention that this madman had Luo Xiaonong by his side. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. When Luo Xiaonong and Dijun were about to approach the staircase, a wave of spatial fluctuations suddenly arose, and then numerous figures instantly teleported over form the other side. Shockingly, it was Lu Wuhan, Shinta Yenran, Yu Qiujing, and Zhuanyu Shui. As soon as they made an appearance, they faintly entered into a confrontational state with Luo Xiaonong and Dijun, and all of them approached the staircase in unison. This wasn't the end of it. Right after Lu Wuhan's group appeared, space fluctuated once more, and then Gongye Zhefu, Zhen Luqing, Yu Ruhua, and Jin Xingyang charged out from within it. In an instant, the surroundings seemed to be extremely bustling, and it was filled with a confrontational and tense aura. All the other cultivators in the surroundings were almost stunned by this scene. These three groups included numerous peerlessly formidable spirit god exalts that possessed monstrous might. At this moment, they'd made an appearance in succession and intended to seize the opportunity to be the first to enter Violet Sky Dao Palace. Such a scene could absolutely be described as a world-shocking scene. "Ha ha! How lively!" Luo Xiaonong suddenly stood on the spot and glanced at Lu Wuhan's group before he spoke lazily. The spot he stood at right now just happened to be 300 m towards the side of the staircase, so once he launched an attack, then no one could dream of passing through safely. "Brother Xiaonong, isn't it better when it's a bit livelier?" Lu Wuhan roared with hearty laughter, and then he waved his hand before he led his group to stand at the other side of the staircase. Meanwhile, Gongye Zhefu's group had stopped as well. So, the situation here had instantly faced into a three-way confrontation. The atmosphere was tense, and undercurrents were brewing. No one took any action so as to avoid suffering the surprise attacks of the others. "I didn't come here to have fun, so the livelier it is, the more annoying it is to me." Luo Xiaonong teased the fiery red-vermilion bird on his shoulder as he spoke slowly. "So, I think all of you should step back, so as to avoid a battle from occurring and all of you blaming me, Luo Xiaonong, for bullying all of you." He paused for a moment before his gaze suddenly descended onto Shinta Yenran, and he revealed a charming and brilliant smile. "Of course, if young Miss Yenran is willing, then you can still choose to follow by my side now." Lu Wuhan's eyes narrowed, and then he smiled lightheartedly. "Since we've come, then how could we possibly withdraw? If those old fellows from the Imperial region found out about this, it would make us seem too cowardly instead. What do you think, Brother Luo? As for Luo Xiaonong's invitation to Xinta Yanran, Lu Wuhan had directly disregarded it, while Xinta Yanran even seemed as if she hadn't heard it at all, and she didn't react to it at all. The slight smile on Luo Xiaonong's lips was restrained when he saw this, and his expression became cold and indifferent. To put it bluntly, just the four of you are really not enough, and you're bound to be completely crushed. If it wasn't out of consideration for the fact that we're all from the Imperial region, I wouldn't waste my breath on all of you at all. That might not necessarily be the case. Xinta Yanran frowned as she spoke. What? You're still dreaming about that kid? Chen Shi, being able to rush back in time. Luo Xiaonong glanced at her, and then he suddenly sighed. Unfortunately, an unexpected event occurred in the God's Fall ruins yesterday, and even I had no choice to but avoid it. Whereas, that kid still hasn't returned until now. So, he has probably suffered misfortune. What? The hearts of Xinta Yanran, Lu Wuhan, and the others sank when they heard this. With Luo Xiaonong's identity, there was entirely no need for him to utilize this to infuriate them on purpose. Then it meant that Chen Shi, who hadn't arrived here until now, might have really suffered misfortune? At this moment, all the other cultivators in the surroundings were extremely shocked as well. Who was Chen Shi? This name wasn't unfamiliar to them since a long time ago. He'd defeated the joint forces of Yu Ruhua and Jin Qingyang by himself, and then he'd blasted such an insane figure like Di Jun back with a single strike. His reputation was so resounding that it even surpassed most spirit god exalts, and he seemed like a dazzling new star that was slowly rising into the sky. Yet now, such a figure might have actually suffered calamity. How could they dare to believe this? Gongye Zhifu acutely noticed that Zhen Liuqing's expression seemed to be slightly dazed and distracted at this moment. This caused him to be unable to help but frown, while a wisp of imperceptible coldness flashed in the depths of his violet pupils. However, he didn't say anything in the end. Whether Chen Shi comes or not seems to be unrelated to the situation before us. Right? Lu Wuhan took a deep breath and spoke slowly. Of course. Luo Xiaonong smiled, and then he turned around and said to Gongye Zhifu, who stood at the side. Zhifu, it's already at a time like this, so there's already no need to continue concealing it. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone in the surroundings was stunned. After that, they watched with shock as Gongye Zhifu actually led his group to Luo Xiaonong's side, and then they gazed at Lu Wuhan's group in unison. Obviously, their groups had actually formed an alliance since a long time ago. All the cultivators in the surroundings erupted into an uproar. This was really an unexpected and shocking change in the situation. Could anyone have imagined that Luo Xiaonong and Gongye Zhifu, who were ranked in the top 10 of the Domain Enlightened chart, would actually form an alliance? In an instant, the expressions of everyone in Lu Wuhan's group turned gloomy, while they felt extremely shocked in their hearts. Never had they imagined that such an unexpected event would actually occur. However, no matter what, a sudden change had occurred in the situation before them. Luo Xiaonong and Gongye Zhifu's groups had converged together to join forces against Lu Wuhan's group, even if Jianan, who was still nowhere to be found until now, was disregarded. Merely this scene before them was extremely disadvantageous to Lu Wuhan's group. The alliance between Luo Xiaonong and Gongye Zhifu had really exceeded the expectations of everyone in the surroundings, and it caused the situation to change abruptly, causing Lu Wuhan's group to be in a precarious situation. After all, no matter if it was Luo Xiaonong or Gongye Zhifu, their strengths were sufficient to crush anyone in Lu Wuhan's group. Now that they joined forced and even had spirit god exalts like Di Jun, Yu Ruhua, and Jin Qingyang as their companions, their overall strength had far exceeded Lu Wuhan's group. It was even to the extent that the others suspected that even if Chen Shi was able to rush back here in time, he would probably be powerless to change anything. At this moment, Luo Xiaonong had undoubtedly become the most dazzling person here. If nothing unexpected occurred, then the 9th grade Emperor rank Ancestral Dao root hidden in the Genesis Ancestral root would definitely be obtained by him. However, right at this moment, Lu Wuhan suddenly said, I remember that there's only a single 9th grade Emperor rank Ancestral Dao root in the Genesis Ancestral root. Since there are so many people in your group, it will probably be difficult to distribute, right? The meaning behind his words was that perhaps all of them had formed an alliance now and seemed to possess overwhelming numbers. Yet when the true fight for the 9th-grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root began, then would Luo Xiaonong and Gongye Zhifu be able to maintain this sort of allied relationship? He wasn't trying to drive a wedge between them, and he was merely describing a fact. However, when he heard these words, a wisp of a smile arose on the corners of Luo Xiaonong's mouth, and he said, "You're right. For the sake of avoiding such disputes from arising, I've long since discussed it with Zhifu and decided that this 9th-grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root will belong to him." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone in the surroundings was shocked. All of them opened their eyes wide and felt disbelief. It was a 9th-grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root, and there was only a single one in the entire Genesis ancestral root. So, how could Luo Xiaonong possibly be willing to give it away like this? This was too unbelievable. It would be easier to understand if Luo Xiaonong said that Gongye Zhifu had given up on obtaining this fortune. But it just so happened that a figure like Luo Xiaonong had made such a decision, and it was puzzling. Even Lu Wuhan and the others couldn't help but feel shocked at this moment. They were utterly unable to figure out the exact reason behind why Luo Xiaonong had made such a huge sacrifice. However, at this moment, no matter if it was Luo Xiaonong, Di Jun, or Gongye Zhifu's group, all of them seemed to be extremely calm. Obviously, they'd already formed an agreement a long time ago, and only they themselves knew if there were any secrets hidden behind all of this. But no matter what, the current developments of the situation were undoubtedly an extremely heavy blow to Lu Wuhan's group. For the sake of obtaining this 9th-grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root, Luo Xiaonong's group had already made meticulous plans for a long time, and their forces were formidable and far exceeded anyone else in the surroundings. Obviously, they were determined to obtain this great fortuitous encounter. On the other hand, Lu Wuhan's group seemed inferior in comparison, and even their hope of coming out on top seemed tiny. "Haha! Brother Kunwu and Pei Wan, both of you don't have to wait any longer. Let's set out together." At this moment, Luo Xiaonong spoke once more, and it was like he'd thrown another grenade. It shocked everyone in the surroundings to the point they just stared blankly at him. After that, two figures appeared swiftly. Shockingly, it was Kunwu Qing and Pei Wan. The two of them smiled as they cupped their hands towards Luo Xiaonong, and then they stood at the side. Obviously, just like Gongye Zhifu's group, they'd formed an alliance with Luo Xiaonong a long time ago. In an instant, Lu Wuhan, Shinta Yanran, Yu Qiujing, and Zhuanyu Shui were unable to maintain their composure, and their expressions turned gloomy. Kunwu Qing and Pei Wan truly couldn't be considered to be strong at all. But they were two spirit god exalts after all. Now that they joined Luo Xiaonong's group, it caused Luo Xiaonong's group to become even stronger, and it caused Lu Wuhan and the others to be unable to help but arouse a feeling of powerlessness. The situation had changed too quickly. It changed so swiftly that it had caught them off guard. All the cultivators in the surroundings sighed with emotion in their hearts. Luo Xiaonong is simply extraordinary in his ability to strategize and bring changes in the situation. In merely a short moment, he has taken complete control of the entire situation and played everyone in the palms of his hand. Such ability is absolutely not something an ordinary person can possess. "Let's go." Luo Xiaonong took a long glance at Lu Wuhan's group, and then he headed towards the white jade staircase in the distance. Gongye Zhifu, Kunwu Qing, and the others followed behind him. At this moment, Lu Wuhan and the others had extremely gloomy expressions. Yet they didn't stop Luo Xiaonong's group in the end. If they entered into battle at this moment, then it would definitely be their group that would be disadvantaged. Rumble. Violet divine radiance erupted from the area before the staircase, and it transformed into a powerful oppressive force that smashed down at Luo Xiaonong's group with the intention of stopping their advance. "Fuck off!" Luo Xiaonong flicked his sleeve, causing a wisp of black lightning to transform into a myriad of sharp blades, and it actually easily slashed the violet divine radiance apart, causing it to disperse into the surroundings. Just like this, he led all of them forward like a peerless and might god of war. He slashed apart the myriads of violet light and ascended along the white jade staircase. Later on, at the end of the staircase, the figure of an ethereal god was suddenly formed. It was 27 m tall, and violet-colored divine light flowed throughout its body. As soon as it appeared, a peerlessly terrifying pressure rumbled and smashed towards the surroundings. It crushed space into powder, and it seemed extremely astounding. Bang! It strode forward while it swung the bronze halberd in its hand. It carried a myriad of strands of violet divine lightning as it slashed down fiercely at Luo Xiaonong's group. Such an attack seemed like it had come from the ages, and it was filled with a terrifying force that was capable of slaughtering the world and obliterating all living beings. The hearts of Luo Xiaonong and the others shook as they'd sensed the approach of danger. They practically instinctively circulated their entire strengths before attacking in unison. Rumble. Various supreme techniques interweaved together, while numerous gorgeous divine artifacts soared through the air, while emanating divine might as they completely enveloped that area. A terrifying sound of collision that sounded like a thunderclap from the 9 heavens resounded, and it seemed like the sun and moon were falling within it while the Grand Tao was wailing in it. All the cultivators in the surroundings were astounded. If it was any other cultivator facing such an attack, that cultivator would have probably suffered calamity and perished a long time ago, right? After a short moment, all the commotion in the surroundings vanished. They could clearly see that Luo Xiaonong and the others were in a slightly sorry state and were gasping for breath, but there were no casualties amongst their group. On the other hand, at this moment, that 27 m tall image of a god had vanished, and it seemed to have already been defeated by Luo Xiaonong's group. Let's go! How could Luo Xiaonong dare to delay? He seized this opportunity to lead his group to charge successively towards the door, and then they vanished in the blink of an eye. When they witnessed this scene, all the cultivators in the surroundings sighed with emotion in their hearts. As expected, only Spirit God Exalts possess the ability to enter a place of great fortune like this. What should we do? Yu Qiujing's expression was livid to the extreme after he witnessed this scene. Let's go as well. How can we possibly give up so early without fighting to the end? As Lu Wuhan's eyes blinked, lightning flowed within them, and they surged with an arrogant expression. Not to mention that according to my knowledge, the Violet Sky Dao Palace had a world of its own within it, and this world is unfathomable and filled with danger. The final ownership of that emperor rank ancestral Dao root is still unknown. All right, it's decided. Shintu Yenran and Zhuanyu Shui pondered deeply for a moment before they agreed. Then what about Qianxia? Are we not going to wait a while longer? Yu Qiujing hesitated. When Qianxia was mentioned, all of their hearts felt heavy. In the end, it was Lu Wuhan who said, "Let's take action first. If he's fine, then he'll definitely rush over." Shintu Yenran, Yu Qiujing, and Zhuanyu Shui nodded and didn't speak any further. Lu Wuhan and the others immediately set out, and they headed towards the staircase in unison. All along the way, they encountered layer after layer of pressure and obstruction. However, they'd safely dealt with it by working together. In the end, they encountered the 27 m tall image of a god as well, and they fought with all their might before they were able to pass through it. However, compared to Luo Xiaonong's group, they seemed to be in an even terrible state. All of their countenances were slightly pale, and they were breathing rapidly while showing no signs of stopping. On one hand, it was because of their own strengths, and on the other hand, it was because there were only 4 of them, whereas there were an entire 8 people in Luo Xiaonong's group. When these two groups were compared, the gap between them was obvious. However, fortunately, they'd similarly been able to pass through this barrier and enter the Violet Sky Dao Palace. After they witnessed all of this, all the cultivators in the surroundings were unable to calm down. It would seem like Lu Wuhan's group has a very slim chance of coming out on top, and it's probably very difficult for them to compete with Luo Xiaonong's group. Of course, Luo Xiaonong is even able to give away a 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root. So would there be anything he's unable of accomplishing? I never expected that the biggest winner this time would be Gongye Zhifu instead. I truly wonder what he promised Luo Xiaonong that Luo Xiaonong actually made such a decision. The crowd discussed animatedly, and all of them didn't look favorably on Lu Wuhan's group. There were also some that were unwilling to accept their face and tried to pass through that white jade staircase that ascended into the sky. However, in the end, they returned in vain, and there was even a cultivator that was heavily injured on the spot and unable to stand back up. All of this instantly put an end to all the thoughts in their hearts, but they were unwilling to leave just like that. Eh? Suddenly, someone exclaimed with surprise as he seemed to have noticed something, and it drew the attention of many others. Rumble. Right at this moment, a wave of violent fluctuations arose in this expanse of space, and then a tall figure emerged. Xianxia. All the cultivators in the surroundings were stunned, and they almost didn't dare believe their eyes. This person had a handsome face, an indifferent and extraordinary bearing, and a pair of eyes that were deep like an abyss. Who else was it but Xianxia? But didn't Luo Xiaonong say just now that he'd already suffered misfortune in the Godsfall ruins yesterday? Could it be that it was a lie? Right when everyone was surprised and bewildered, Xianxia had already arrived swiftly by the side of a group of cultivators. "Where are they?" asked Xianxia. It was exactly Tao Dong, Wei Zifu, and the others that stood before him. Because they were unable to ascend into the ranks of Spirit God Exalts, they could only wait outside here. All of them were pleasantly surprised when they saw Xianxia, and Tao Dong immediately and swiftly described everything that had occurred earlier. Xianxia's eyes instantly narrowed when he finished listening to Tao Dong. He'd similarly never imagined that Luo Xiaonong would have actually formed an alliance with Gongye Zhifu and the others. Moreover, it was even to the extent that figures like Kun Wuqing and Pei Wen had joined Luo Xiaonong's group as well. Heh! How scheming of him! A wisp of a piercingly cold arc arose on the corners of Xianxia's mouth, and then he shook his head before he looked at Tao Dong and the others. "Everyone, I'll be leaving first. There isn't much time left." "You! By yourself?" Tao Dong and the others were shocked, and Tao Dong hurriedly said, "That white jade staircase is covered in danger." As he spoke, he started to describe the scenes from before, and he placed emphasis on how terrifying that 27 tall image of a god was. However, before Tao Dong could finish speaking, he noticed that Xianxia had already taken action and flashed towards the white jade staircase. Since he obtained the inheritance, the profound heartsword technique, Xianxia had rushed back all along the way, yet he'd never expected that he would still be a step too late in the end and wasn't able to converge with Lu Wuhan and the others. Especially when he heard that Luo Xiaonong had formed an alliance with Gongye Zhifu and promised to give the 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao root to Gongye Zhifu, it caused a wisp of an urgent feeling to arise in Xianxia's heart. His main objective for coming to the desolate Manka ruins was to fulfill his promise to Empress Yuche, and it was to stop Gongye Zhifu from obtaining the 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao root. Under such circumstances, Xianxia naturally didn't dare waste even a trace of time. Swoosh! His figure flashed, and he'd already flashed towards the white jade staircase in the distance. Could it be that he intends to traverse it by himself? Isn't this fellow being a bit too careless? Even Luo Xiaonong and the others seemed to be in an extremely sorry state when they entered the palace. So, how could he possibly traverse this staircase and enter the Violet Sky Dao Palace by himself? Hee. Just watch and see. There's definitely be a show to watch. Let me see if this Xianxia is really as formidable as the rumors say. However, it's slightly improbable for him to be able to traverse it by himself. When they saw Xianxia charge out by himself and approach the white jade staircase, all the cultivators in the surroundings exploded into an uproar. Some were doubtful, some were disdainful, some shook their heads, some took pleasure in the misfortune that was about to befall Xianxia. All of them revealed various different expressions. After all, they'd already personally witnessed that no matter if it was Luo Xiaonong's group or Lu Wuhan's group, both groups were in an extremely sorry state when they traversed through the staircase. The crux was that the might of the 27 tall image of a god that stood on guard at the end was truly too terrifying. Under such circumstances, they didn't think that Xianxia would be able to accomplish this by himself. Amidst the gazes of all of these cultivators that intended to watch the show, Xianxia arrived before the staircase, and he raised his head and looked up. The palace was grand. It floated beneath the sky while suffused and seething with violet divine radiance. It was the sign of an imperial sovereign, and it was boundless and brilliant. A white jade staircase ascended straight up towards it and was connected to the door of the palace. At this instant, A wisp of an obscure fluctuation arose from the surface of the bloodied, damaged sword, King Xian's sword. Within Xianxi's sea of consciousness, and it buzzed without end. She was already clearly aware that this was the place where Xian resided and cultivated. In other words, Xian was the owner of the Violet Sky Dao Palace. Of course, this was also the home of the King Xian sword. According to Xianxi's current discerning ability, the King Xian sword wasn't a natural spirit treasure, and it was already damaged and decayed. So, its might had ceased to exist. Yet because it was branded with a strand of Xian's will, it had instantly become extraordinary. It was even to the extent that she was able to faintly sense that Xian's feelings towards the King Xian sword was like how he felt about the talisman armament. It was a companion that he could experience life and death with, and it was irreplaceable. She took a deep breath, and then he didn't hesitate to ascend the staircase. At this moment, all the cultivators in the surroundings opened their eyes wide and refrained from blinking as they were deeply afraid of missing the slightest detail. However, to their surprise, Xianxia actually didn't suffer even a trace of obstruction from the beginning until the end. The staircase was deathly silent. Violet divine radiance didn't arise from it, nor did any terrifying pressure suddenly sweep out from it. It was even to the extent that there wasn't even a trace of movement from it. How could this be possible? All of them felt shocked to the point their eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets, and they were astounded. Many of them had tried to traverse the staircase by force, and there were still some injuries remaining on their bodies. Moreover, they'd even witnessed the process of Luo Xiaonong, Luwuhin, and the other spirit god exalts traversing the staircase, and it was utterly not as easy as how it was for Xianxia now. This was simply no different than walking through a flat expanse of ground. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The surroundings were deathly silent, and only Xianxi's steady footsteps resounded with a unique rhythm as he ascended step by step. He had his hands behind his back, revealed a calm expression, and his green clothes and dense jet-black hair fluttered with the wind. He didn't seem like he was traversing a test, and it was like he was revisiting his hometown instead. He seemed so composed and indifferent. Bang! However, when he approached the end of the staircase, a 27 tall image of a god suddenly surged into appearance. Its entire body was suffused by violet divine light, while it held a bronze halberd, and it possessed extremely vast and terrifying divine might. All the cultivators in the surroundings actually heaved a sigh of relief when they saw this. Now this is normal. Otherwise, if that fellow is allowed to enter the Violet Sky Dao Palace so easily, then it would truly be unfair. On the other hand, the hearts of Tao Dong, Wei Zifu, and the others constricted, and they were extremely worried. Earlier, when Luwuhin and the others traversed the staircase, they'd almost been defeated by this image of a god's. At this moment, Xianxia was all alone. So would he be able to resist this image of a god? However, the scene that followed caused everyone in the surroundings to be dumbstruck, and their mouths couldn't help but open wide. The heavens bless my lord! When it saw Xianxia who stood before it, the figure of that image actually stiffened, and then it suddenly let out a long howl that seemed like it was crying, laughing, happy, and sorrowful. After that, it suddenly transformed into a strand of violet smoke and vanished without a trace. This was the reason that all of them were dumbstruck. It was too unbelievable. Who could have imagined that the image of a god which caused Luo Xiaonong and the others to fall into a sorry state earlier would actually act in such an inconceivable way at this moment? What does it mean by the heavens bless my lord? Could it be that Xianxia executed some sort of soul-controlling secret technique that affected that image of a god without it realizing? Everyone was bewildered, and they were extremely shocked. On the other hand, when Xianxia who stood on the staircase witnessed this scene, his figure stopped for a moment as well. He went silent for a short moment before he continued up through the palace door and vanished. What exactly is going on? Why was he able to pass through unhindered all along the way? Could it be that he possesses some sort of special technique that we haven't noticed? It's too inconceivable. I originally intended to see exactly what sort of ability this fellow possessed. Yet who would have imagined that such an inconceivable scene would actually occur? As soon as Xianxia left, the surroundings instantly erupted in an uproar, and it gave rise to a babble of discussion. Some people suspected that the obstruction on the staircase had already vanished, so they moved forward to probe it. However, they hadn't even approached it when they were blasted flying by a strand of violet divine radiance, causing them to let out shrill cries. At this moment, everyone finally confirmed that there was definitely something strange about Xianxia. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to enter Violet Sky Dao Palace so easily. Perhaps with fellow Daoist Xianxia's participation in the matter this time, he might really cause some sort of miracle to occur? Tao Dong muttered while a trace of hope arose in his heart. There was an entire independent world within the Violet Sky Dao Palace. As soon as he arrived here, a dazzling array of buildings were reflected in his eyes. All of the buildings were ancient, grand, towering, and suffused with an ancient aura. They were dignified, lofty, and resided in various different areas. He could imagine that numerous innate gods had definitely resided here during the Mancha period, and they comprehended the Tao, cultivated, and stood aloof from worldly matters as they resided here. Yet now, all of that had ceased to exist, and only an atmosphere of deathly silence and desolation remained. There was a completely straight limestone pathway beneath Xianxia's feet, and it led towards the depths of the palace. At the sides of the limestone pathway was an expanse of pools that were linked with each other. Clear water murmured within them, and they emanated strands of milky white divine mist. A few divine lotuses floated within them, yet the lotus flowers were already gone. Obviously, they'd already been plucked by others. This is the place where the Genesis ancestral root resides. Xianxia swept the surroundings with his gaze, yet he frowned after a short moment. This place was truly too huge. It formed a world of its own, and it was like a large world that was densely covered with countless buildings. It was like a dense maze, and it would take an unknown period of time to slowly search this entire world. Xianxia pondered deeply for a moment before he started walking along the limestone pathway. It wasn't long before he arrived at the hall at the end of the pathway. It was extremely grand, and numerous ancient stone pillars stood towering within it. Moreover, the stone pillars were inscribed with numerous mysterious totems and markings. However, an intense battle had obviously occurred here. The hall was filled with the marks of battle. There were collapsed tables, destroyed incense furnaces, shattered bronze lanterns. Xianxia's eyes couldn't help but narrow when he witnessed all of this, and he thought to himself, could it be that Lu Wuhan and the others have already entered into battle with Luo Xiaonong's group? Fortunately, there were no corpses in the surroundings, and there were no blood stains on the ground. This allowed Xianxia to heave a sigh of relief, and he was clearly aware that there were probably not deaths during this battle. But where exactly have Lu Wuhan and the others gone? Xianxia released his formidable will, and he carefully searched every inch of aura in the hall. After a short while, his brows raised while his eyes were suffused with a wisp of bright light. He'd captured a strand of aura that belonged solely to Xintu Yenran. She definitely knew that I would come looking, so she left a strand of her aura behind. Fortunately, I can still be considered to be in time. Otherwise, if I was a little bit later, then this strand of aura would have probably vanished. Xianxia swiftly deduced in his mind. In next to no time, he locked onto a direction, and he didn't hesitate to teleport and swiftly vanish on the spot. Swish! Space fluctuated. Expanse after expanse of ancient buildings flashed by and vanished all along the way. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough time, otherwise, Xianxia would really want to search those buildings. After all, this was Xian's residence, and countless innate gods had resided here all those years ago. So, marks left behind by them definitely existed within these ancient buildings. However, Xianxia shook his head right after that and rejected this thought of his. After all, the Genesis ancestral root had already experienced countless years until now, and countless cultivators had entered this place during this period of time. So, no matter how many secret treasures were hidden in these buildings, they would have probably been completely plundered a long time ago. 10 minutes later, Xianxia stopped moving. Shockingly, a brilliant, magnificent, and extremely grand divine palace stood towering 500 kilometers ahead. It was completely suffused by golden light and emanated violet divine radiance. It was like an imperial sovereign that resided here, and it looked down upon the surroundings and seemed extremely extraordinary. Even if it was still far away, Xianxia was still able to sense a strand of a dignified aura assaulting his face. It caused him to exclaim endlessly with shock, and he guessed in his heart, could this be the place where Xian resided and cultivated all those years ago? But in next to no time he seemed to have noticed something, and his face sank. He couldn't be bothered to think any further, and his figure flashed towards the palace at full speed. This palace that seemed grand like the residence of a sovereign was extremely vast. It was suffused with chaotic qi, and it was divine and extraordinary. However, at this moment this palace was in a mess. It was covered in damage, and the murderous aura of battle and the pungent smell of blood still suffused the air. When Xianxia arrived here, he noticed that Lu Wuhan, Yu Qiujing, and Zhuan Yushui were actually sitting in pools of blood. Their entire bodies were covered in injuries while their countenances were pale and dim, and they were gasping for breath. Only Xintu Yanran was in a good state. Merely her gorgeous face was completely pale, and the space between her brows was filled with exhaustion. Obviously, a battle had occurred here before Xianxia arrived, and Lu Wuhan and the others had been heavily injured during the battle. Xianxia. When Xianxia arrived here, he was instantly noticed by Lu Wuhan and the others, causing their spirits to be refreshed before their faces dimmed down again. Being reduced to such a miserable state was truly a bit shameful, and they felt ashamed to be seen in this state by Xianxia. What exactly happened? Xianxia was slightly worried, and a frown seemed to be fixed on his face. It was all thanks to the help of Lu Wuhan and the others that he was able to travel all along the way and arrive smoothly at the ancestral root grounds, and they'd become friends since a long time ago. At this moment, when he saw them in distress, Xianxia was rather furious and uncomfortable in his heart. Alas, you're a step too late. They've already seized that 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root. Lu Wuhan sighed, and his voice was filled with a bitter tone. Xianxia's eyes narrowed, and he swept the surroundings with his gaze. He suddenly noticed that there was a pool at the center of the hall, and the pool emanated a strand of deep and shimmering violet divine radiance. Moreover, strands of extremely pure and thick ancestral aura surged from within it. If Xianxia wasn't wrong, then the pool was probably the 9th grade ancestral root. Yet now, the bottom of this ancestral root was completely empty. Obviously, it was just as Lu Wuhan had said. The 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root produced here had already been taken away. This caused Xianxia's heart to sink. I was still a step too late in the end. Earlier, it was us that arrived here first, and we noticed this 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root. However, we never expected that we would suffer the surprise attack of Luo Xiaonong's group right at the moment we were trying to gather it. Xintu Yanran took a deep breath and described everything that occurred earlier. Her voice carried rage and a strand of deep helplessness. Couldn't be helped. When compared to Luo Xiaonong's group, their overall strength was too much more inferior in the end. Even if Xianxia wasn't late, it would probably not help at all. Why did they? As he gazed at Lu Wuhan and the others who were heavily injured and had dim expressions, Xianxia opened his mouth but didn't continue in the end. However, Xintu Yanran had discerned his thoughts, and she couldn't help but laugh with self-ridicule. You want to ask why they didn't kill us? Before Xianxia could speak, Xintu Yanran continued. It's very simple. It's because if they kill us, then they'll be in an extremely terrible situation once they return to the imperial region. Xianxia thought for a moment and instantly came to an understanding. At the bottom of it all, it was because the identities of Lu Wuhan, Xintu Yanran, Yu Qiujing, and Zhuan Yushui were too extraordinary. All of them had ancient and great powers from the imperial region standing behind them, and all of them were extraordinary existences amongst spirit god exalts. If any one of them were killed, then it would probably cause an ancient power to be infuriated. Perhaps Luo Xiaonong and the others were unafraid of this, but if they really acted in this way, then they would definitely have to pay an extremely heavy price. It was the same if the situation was turned around. If Lu Wuhan and the others occupied a position of absolute advantage, they would probably not kill Luo Xiaonong and the others as well. This was how forces, identity, strength, and various other factors restrained each other. After all of them were from the imperial region, and it was even to the extent that there were relationships between the clans and sects they were from. So, no matter how ferociously they fought amongst themselves in private, they would absolutely not do such a thing openly. If it was an ordinary cultivator, then even if that cultivator was from a large power in the imperial region, that cultivator's death wouldn't matter. Because in terms of importance, they were utterly unable to compare to spirit God exalts. This was the reality of things. However, Xianxia didn't possess such considerations. So, that was the reason why he felt slightly curious when he saw what had happened to Lu Wuhan and the others. However, even if he understood now, Xianxia didn't accept such an unspoken rule that was an established practice. When he faced an enemy, he would never hold back because of his enemy's origins or background. Then, where are they? Xianxia asked in a low voice. As far as he was concerned, so long as they hadn't left the Genesis ancestral root, then he had a chance to seize the 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao root from them. Not to mention that Xianxia wasn't willing to accept failure just like this. He'd promised Empress Yuche that he would stop Gongye Zhifu from obtaining the 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao root. Now that such an unexpected event had occurred, how could he possibly be willing to give up? Lu Wuhan and the others went silent when they heard this, and they were unwilling to mention it. However, Xianxia acutely noticed that their gazes were inadvertently glancing towards the same direction in the hall. That direction was at the side of the hall. It was in a complete mess, and there was an extremely ordinary door at its side. However, when Xianxia shot his gaze over, he instantly noticed that there was something unusual about it. That door was actually faintly suffused with a strand of obscure fluctuation, and it seemed like a door that led to another world. It was quiet and mysterious. This caused Xianxia to attain a flash of understanding, and he intended to go over and investigate carefully. Xianxia, Lu Wuhan stopped him and said, "You can't defeat them by yourself. Let's accept our defeat this time." Xianxia's brows raised as he said, "How do you know the outcome before giving it a try?" Lu Wuhan laughed bitterly. "I know you're unwilling to give up, but you can't allow yourself to be overwhelmed by rage. If you fall into their hands, then the consequences that await you will probably..." He didn't finish speaking, yet the meaning he wished to convey was extremely clear. With Xianxia's identity, Luo Xiaonong and the others would absolutely dare to kill him. Xianxia naturally understood the meaning behind Lu Wuhan's words, and he couldn't help but sigh. After that, a wisp of a resolute expression flashed in his eyes. He immediately flicked his sleeve and withdrew 3 jade boxes, and he passed them to Lu Wuhan, Shinta Yanran, and Yu Qiujing. "These are 3 7th grade ancestral Dao roots. Take them and leave this place," said Xianxia before he headed towards that door. The reactions of Lu Wuhan and the others caused him to have a strong feeling that Luo Xiaonong's group had definitely gone through that door. "Wait!" Lu Wuhan stopped him. "Do you know what lays behind that door? That's the door of the Grand Dao. It's a chaotic ancestral root that the innate gods of this place sealed with supreme divine might. It's said to contain the killing intent of all the 3,000 Grand Daos in the universe. Once you take a single wrong step, then you're bound to perish in there." Xianxia's eyes narrowed, and his footsteps stopped. The door of the Grand Dao? A sealed chaotic ancestral root? All the killing intent of the 3,000 Grand Daos in the universe. Why would such a place be established in Xian's residence? Numerous questions surged into Xianxia's heart. We originally thought that this door of the Grand Dao was just a purely imaginary legend, and no one paid any attention to it. But who would have imagined that it was actually real? Lu Wuhan sighed, and his voice carried a wisp of a depressed feeling and even a wisp of a deep sense of loss. "Do you know why Luo Xiaonong willingly gave up that 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao root to Gongye Zhifu?" Xianxia frowned and said, "Could it be because of this door of the Grand Dao?" He seemed to feel slight disbelief. It was a 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao root. So could there be anything in the world that was more precious than that to a domain enlightened spirit god? Exactly. Lu Wuhan's gaze focused onto the door in the distance, And he said, "A true chaotic ancestral root is sealed within the door of the Grand Tao. According to legend, it's capable of producing an ancestral Tao root that's even more formidable than a 9th-grade emperor rank ancestral Tao root." Xianxia was shocked in his heart, and he said, "How could that be possible?" Lu Wuhan and the others sighed. Just like Xianxia, they'd felt disbelief earlier, and they'd taken all of this to be a purely imaginary legend. But when Luo Xiaonong's group utilized some sort of secret technique to open the door of the Grand Tao and enter it, they finally came to an understanding that the legend was actually true. The 7th grade is the monarch rank, the 8th grade is the king rank, and the 9th grade is the emperor rank. These are publicly acknowledged as ancestral Tao roots that can only be chanced upon by luck. Moreover, the emperor rank ancestral Tao root is already formidable to an unimaginable degree. Lu Wuhan took a deep breath and said slowly, "However, there's another legend. A soul Tao root is being nurtured in the chaotic ancestral root. There's only one such ancestral Tao root in the world, and it possesses the might of the merits and virtues of an imperial sovereign. It possesses the merits of the ancestral root, so it's respected as an emperor. It possesses the virtues of the ancestral root, so it's respected as a sovereign. With both merits and virtues, it's a sovereign amongst emperors. This ancestral Tao root born within the door of the Grand Tao is called the Imperial Sovereign Tao root. It's said to be perfect, supreme, and possesses the might of a soul overlord. If one is able to refine and absorb it while advancing into the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, then in the future, one would definitely become an overlord in the ancient god domain that looks down proudly upon the world." Lu Wuhan spoke word by word, and he seemed to be describing an ancient secret. It caused Xianxia to be unable to help but feel a wisp of shock. The Imperial Sovereign Tao root. Who could have imagined that such a supreme treasure would actually exist above the 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Tao root? If it wasn't because of that, how could Luo Xiaonong have possibly given that 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Tao root to Gongye Zhifu? A wisp of a ridiculing expression suffused the corners of Lu Wuhan's mouth. However, since this treasure is said to be a sole existence, then how could it have not been discovered and dug up by someone during the countless years of the past? Xianxia frowned and was slightly bewildered. Who knows? Lu Wuhan and the others didn't know as well. After all, they'd thought that it was a purely imaginary legend, and they'd utterly never imagined that such a supremely precious treasure really existed in the Genesis ancestral root. Xianxia nodded, and he pondered deeply in silence. "Xianxia, don't take the risk, even if you're really not afraid of Luo Xiaonong and the others, but you have to remember that the door of the Grand Tao is filled with all the killing intent of the 3,000 Grand Taos in the universe. Once you take a single wrong step, the consequence would be death." "Exactly. For safety's sake, you should return with us. According to our deduction, even if Luo Xiaonong and the others have entered it, they would definitely suffer an extremely great amount of danger. Fortune is always accompanied by danger, and it's possible that they could perish at any moment." At this moment, even Shinta Yanran, Yu Qiujing, and Zhuanyu Shui persuaded Xianxia, and they weren't willing to watch him take such a risk by himself. Xianxia went silent for a moment before he said with a smile, "So in this way, it's impossible for Luo Xiaonong's group to smoothly obtain that Imperial Sovereign Tao root?" This was obviously undoubtable. According to Lu Wuhan, the world behind the door of the Grand Tao was filled with the killing intent of the 3,000 Grand Taos in the universe, and it could be said that every step one took was filled with killing intent and extreme danger. One could lose one's life at any moment, so it was naturally impossible for them to pass through so easily. Lu Wuhan and the others were stunned, and then they sighed endlessly in their hearts. Just these words alone had allowed them to understand that Xianxia had made up his mind, and they were unable to persuade him from doing it. Xianxia swept all of them with his gaze, and then he cupped his hands in a serious manner and said, "Everyone, thank you for taking care of me up until now." Lu Wuhan sighed, and he waved his hand and said, Forget it. Forget it. Since you've made up your mind already, then go on quickly. Xianxia, take care of yourself. You must be careful. We'll be waiting here for you. You must come back." Shinta Yanran, Yu Qiujing, and Zhuanyu Shui spoke successively. Xianxia nodded before he smiled lightheartedly, and then his figure flashed and stepped through that mysterious and quiet door before vanishing from their fields of vision. This fellow! Yu Qiujing suddenly sighed, yet he was at a loss for words. Let's make the best use of our time to recover. If Xianxia suffers some sort of mishap when he returns, then we'll be able to assist him promptly. Shintu Yenron's starry eyes glistened, and his pretty face was covered in a firm expression. Yes, in my opinion, this fellow Xianxia might really succeed. Don't forget that Luo Xiaonong spoken shamelessly about how Xianxia had suffered calamity yesterday. But look, isn't this fellow still alive and well? Lu Wuhan laughed lightheartedly. Exactly. His ability to traverse the white jade staircase and enter Violet Sky Dao Palace itself proves how extraordinary he is. Even the reserved and reticent Zhuanyu Shui spoke at this moment. Just these words alone caused Lu Wuhan and the others to be instantly stunned, and they sighed with emotion in their hearts. Only now did they realize that this fellow, Xianxia, was really not someone any one of them could compare to, because merely the accomplishment of traversing that white jade staircase alone was absolutely not something they could accomplish. Swish! As soon as he entered through the door, Xianxia felt as if he'd entered into a lustrous and dazzling world. The entire sky was filled with gorgeous and blazing divine radiance, and it illuminated the entire world. Xianxia's eyes narrowed, and he finally got used to this environment. Countless paths that extended towards the surroundings lay before him like a spiderweb. There were thousands of them, and they formed a dense mass of paths. Every single path represented a profundity of the Grand Tao. A green path that represented the Grand Tao of wood. A crimson path that represented the Grand Tao of fire. A blue path that represented the Grand Tao of water. Black and white that represented yin and yang. It was even to the extent that there were numerous paths that revealed the phenomena of talisman markings, vortexes, starlight, wind, clouds, lightning, and so on and so forth. There were too many. They formed a dense mass that seemed to be boundless. All of them were suffused with a pure aura that seemed primitive and chaotic. They emanated the glow of divinity, and they seemed to be extremely divine. Looks like this is the place where the chaotic ancestral root is sealed. As Xianxia's eyes gazed towards the surroundings, they were enshrouded by divine radiance, and they were deep like the starry sky. He ceaselessly observed the surroundings, and he wasn't in a rush to act. In his opinion, this scene before him was the 3,000 Grand Taos that Lu Wuhan spoke of. This was a form of general address, and in reality, the amount of Grand Taos was vast like an ocean and practically boundless. This place contains the killing intent of the 3,000 Grand Taos, and it can be said that every single step here is filled with killing intent. So, if Luo Xiaonong and the others intend to seize that sole imperial sovereign Tao root, then they definitely have to traverse this barrier before me. Xianxia pondered deeply and roughly determined that this scene before him was a test as well. No matter which path one chose, one would definitely have to endure all the killing intent lying in wait on the path. Moreover, this sort of killing intent would definitely be extraordinary. However, the scene he witnessed next had truly exceeded Xianxia's expectations, and it completely overturned his judgment. Because as soon as he stepped foot onto the path of the talisman Grand Tao, the heavens and the earth instantly moved while the scene before his eyes changed abruptly. All the other paths had vanished, and only this path remained. However, it wasn't a pure path of the talisman Grand Tao. In an instant, Xianxia at least sensed that this path contained no less than 10 Grand Tao profundities. There were the 5 elements, yin, yang, wind, lightning, star, light, darkness. It seemed like so long as it was a Grand Tao profundity he'd grasped, then it would appear and fuse into this path. This caused Xianxia's heart to be unable to help but shake, and he became even more vigilant. Rumble, rumble. Xianxia started moving forward. Yet as soon as he moved, he felt a form of enormous pressure, and it smashed down onto him like numerous divine mountains. If he hadn't been vigilant since the beginning, then he would have almost been shaken to the point of being blasted back by this pressure, and the vital blood within his entire body roiled. Xianxia took a deep breath and resisted this heavy pressure as he continued forward. All along the way, All sorts of terrifying scenes like volcanoes, storms, tidal waves, stars, falling stars, overlapped light and darkness, and so on and so forth appeared frequently. She knew that all of these were formed by the various grand Taos. They poisoned the Tao heart and shook one's will. Coupled with the energy of the grand Tao that pressed down upon him, it caused him to feel suffocated. However, she didn't stop moving. He circulated his entire cultivation, causing divine energy to surge throughout his body, and he spared no effort. Only in this way was he able to slightly relieve the pressure on him. This path was completely straight yet seemed to be endless. The further ahead he went, the greater the pressure he felt was. Later on, every single step she took caused the bones in his entire body to emanate cracking sounds from being unable to withstand the weight of the pressure. Moreover, divine radiance erupted from his entire body and fluctuated violently. Just like this, she forcefully persisted for 10 days. He'd been silently counting, and he concluded that he'd at least walked 1,500 kilometers step by step until now. But up until now, he seemed to still be unable to discover where the end of the path lay. This caused him to be unable to help but sigh in his heart, and his expression grew heavier. If his heart energy hadn't attained the first forging of the True Heart Sutra, and the divine dark parasol tree within him hadn't been continuously supplying him with divine energy, he even suspected that he would be utterly unable to persist until now. On the other hand, if it was any other cultivator with a slightly weaker strength, that cultivator would have probably been blasted flying a long time ago, while the fate of the cultivator would be unknown. What sort of method did Luo Xiaonong and the others utilize to pass through this barrier? In next to no time, she shook his head and discarded these distracting thoughts. At this moment, his entire body was slightly unable to bear the burden on it, and it wasn't the time to think about anything else. Crack, crack. Another 3 days passed. On this day, Xi's entire figure trembled before cracks appeared on numerous bones within his body, and they were on the verge of collapse. She let out a muffled groan, and he experienced bone-piercing pain. He raised his eyes and looked towards the distance. The path was still far, and he was still unable to see the end. She couldn't help but frown when he saw this. If this continues, then I'll definitely suffer misfortune. After he pondered deeply for a long time, she gritted his teeth and continued once more. This wasn't his limit, and if his life was really in danger, then he would definitely turn around immediately and leave. Rumble. After 10 minutes passed, a trace of blood suddenly seeped out from the corners of Xi's mouth, and the bones in his entire body cracked violently. They were on the verge of collapsing completely. At this moment, he could only stand still on the spot while his expression was unsightly to the extreme. Isn't this path a little too terrifying? Even with my current cultivation, I'm only able to persist until here, so how did Luo Xiaonong and the others move forward? Right at this moment, the King Xian's sword in Xi's sea of consciousness suddenly buzzed, and then it emanated a strand of obscure fluctuation. After that, the tune of the grand Tao instantly resounded by Xi's ears. It was like the sound of nature, and it covered the heavens and the earth as it moved towards him from all directions and made him feel as if he'd obtained sudden enlightenment. At practically the exact same moment, strands of surging and thick aura of the grand Tao flowed into Xi's entire body like spring water, and they converged around every single inch of skin on Xi's body. At this moment, she felt a comfortable feeling from body to heart, and it felt as if he was immersed in a warm spring. The pressure and pain he'd endured for days were suddenly swept away, and even his bones that were on the verge of splitting seemed as if they were reconstructed and tempered once more at this moment, causing them to emanate droplets of golden divine radiance. This was the energy of the grand Taos of the universe that were born within the chaotic ancestral root. At this moment, they seemed as if they'd received some sort of summon, and they nurtured Xi's entire body, causing his entire body to be in a peaceful, glistening, and extremely divine state. She couldn't be bothered to think about all of this. He sat down cross-legged, circulated the vital energy in his entire body, and started to meditate. He finally understood the test behind the door of the Grand Tao. It was a form of tempering, and it was a fortuitous encounter as well. Of course, all of this couldn't do without the assistance of the King Xian's sword. At the same time that Chun Shi entered into a meditative state, at another area behind the door of the Grand Dao. Clang! Clang! An ancient and heavy brass bell floated into the air. Its surface was inscribed with numerous mysterious diagrams, and it emanated strands of blood-colored divine light that swept towards the surroundings. Luo Xiaonong's group stood behind the brass bell, and their expressions were extremely heavy. What's going on? Luo Xiaonong turned around and frowned as he looked at Kun Wuqing. At this moment, Kun Wuqing was drenched in sweat, and he had an anxious expression. There was an extremely strange-looking worm that was completely pitch black and around the size of a thumb resting on his palm. This worm was called the ancestral root spirit worm, and it was something Kun Wuqing had gone through numerous hardships and took great pains to find in the Genesis ancestral root. The only use of this worm was its ability to search for the sole imperial sovereign Dao root. Something seems to have gone wrong. The ancestral root spirit room is actually unable to sense the right direction. Kun Wuqing was anxious and bewildered. As soon as these words were spoken, it caused the expressions of the others to turn gloomy. Bang! Right at this moment, the brass bell suddenly trembled violently and wailed. Pei Wen seemed to have suffered backlash from this, and a mouthful of blood suddenly sprayed from his mouth. When they witnessed this scene, all of their hearts jerked, and their expressions grew even gloomier. This bell was called the Divine Blood Desolation Bell, and it was an extremely miraculous natural spirit treasure. Most importantly, unlike other natural spirit treasures, the Divine Blood Desolation Bell was able to disperse the invisible pressure of the Grand Dao. It was precisely because of the combination of the Divine Blood Desolation Bell and Ancestral Root Spirit Worm that they were able to smoothly advance until here in these past few days, and they'd safely avoided numerous dangers. But at this moment, no matter if it was the Ancestral Root Spirit Worm or the Divine Blood Desolation Bell, a mishap had occurred to both of them in succession. This caused Luo Xiaonong and the others to instantly feel that the current situation was slightly bad. OM! The Divine Blood Desolation Bell wailed without end, and the strands of blood-red divine radiance it emanated were on the verge of dispersal. This caused Pei Wen to simply not dare believe his eyes, and he cried out involuntarily. Some sort of unexpected change has definitely occurred within this door of the Grand Dao. Otherwise, this treasure of mine would definitely not be so weak. This was a fact. Because at this moment, it wasn't just his Divine Blood Desolation Bell that had lost its effectiveness. Even the Ancestral Root Spirit Worm in Kun Wuqing's possession was the same. The expressions of everyone turned gloomy. They were unable to figure out exactly what had occurred here. However, they were clearly aware that once they lose the protection of the Divine Blood Desolation Bell and didn't have the Ancestral Root Spirit Worm to lead the way, then they would definitely have to directly resist all the killing intent on this path. This was a path of the Grand Dao. There was a total of 8 people in their group, and every single one of them possessed various different Grand Daos. This meant that while they were on this path, they had to face the pressure from all the Grand Daos that they possessed. According to the information they'd obtained, since the ancient times until now, there hadn't been a single person capable of relying on his own strength to overcome this path. If it wasn't for that, the Imperial Sovereign Dao root would have probably been taken countless years ago, and how could it possibly still be there for them to pluck? What should we do? All of them looked at each other. Put your treasures away. From now on, I'll lead the way. At this moment, Luo Xiaonong suddenly took a deep breath while his narrow and long eyes were suffused with a wisp of a resolute expression. He seemed as if he'd made some sort of decision. All the others were stunned, and then they saw Luo Xiaonong suddenly step forward, and he arrived in front of the group before he flicked his sleeve. OM! A beast-skin soared in the sky as it glowed brilliantly, and then deafening strands of the sounds of chanting and the reading scriptures drifted out from it after that. The images of a myriad of living beings actually floated up into appearance from the beast skin. All of them had sincere expressions, and they knelt on the ground as if they were worshipping. At the same time, strands of dazzling divine light charged out, and it transformed into a rain of light that descended in the surroundings. Every single droplet that descended to the ground transformed into a page of a Taoist scripture, and these scriptures were branded with numerous obscure and ancient characters. Moreover, every single one of these words was like a gem that glowed brilliantly. Countless golden droplets formed into innumerable pages of Taoist scriptures and ancient text. For a time, all sorts of words drifted through this expanse of the heavens and the earth while the grand sound of scriptures being read and ancient sages preaching resounded. Such a scene could be described as a supreme divine miracle. It caused others to feel shocked and wish for nothing more than to sit down cross-legged and listen to this teaching. The sage portrait? All the others were shocked, and they seemed to feel disbelief. This was one of the most mysterious natural spirit treasures in the imperial region. It was originally a mysterious beast skin born from within the chaos, but after it was refined via secret techniques by numerous supreme innate gods, it converged the karmic luck of all living beings and the core blood of sages. Its might was so formidable that it could be considered to be heaven-defying. According to rumor, the ancestors of the Luo clan from countless years ago had relied on this treasure to comprehend the Tao, and it allowed them to establish such an enormous and eternally dazzling clan that has continued to exist in the imperial region until now. Moreover, there were numerous rumors about the might this treasure possessed. But it was without any doubt that the current accomplishments and forces possessed by the Luo clan within the imperial region were closely related to this treasure. Now, Luo Xiaonong had actually brought this treasure with him, and it instantly shocked all of the others. But right after that, a strand of strong confidence surged out from their hearts, and they felt extremely excited. Only now did they understand that Luo Xiaonong had already made complete preparations for the sake of traversing this path and obtaining that imperial sovereign Tao root. Everyone, let's go. Luo Xiaonong couldn't help but grin as he sensed the unusual gazes coming from the surroundings, and he instructed casually before he strode forward. The sage portrait glowed and flowed with a myriad of strands of Taoist scriptures and ancient text, and it resounded with the grand sound of gods chanting and reading scriptures. An invisible force swept out, and it easily dispersed the pressure that was surging over from the path. It seemed to be extremely miraculous. All of the others felt another wave of excitement in their hearts upon witnessing this scene. With the sage portrait on our side, would we need to worry about being unable to pass through this barrier? Rumble. At another area, Xianxia sat cross-legged while a myriad of strands of dazzling divine radiance arose from his entire body, and they transformed into strands of mysterious and extremely dazzling talisman markings that coiled endlessly around him. His expression was calm while his entire body was enveloped by a primitive aura of the grand Tao from inside out, and it ceaselessly nurtured and tempered his foundation in the Tao. During this entire process, his grasp of the divine Tao improved rapidly as well, and it seemed to be extremely inconceivable. This was the energy of the grand Tao in the chaotic ancestral root. It was ancient, primitive, and was boundlessly close to the aura of the quintessence of the grand Tao. So, when the chaos was split apart, it formed into the heavens and the earth, and the heaven Tao circulated in everything. All things were born because of it, order existed because of it, and the landscape of the world was formed because of it. Everything came from the quintessence Tao energy from within the chaos. The door of the grand Tao was a chaotic ancestral root that all the innate gods of the Mancha period had sealed up, so the purity and age of the energy of the grand Tao within it was obvious. Now, because of the unexpected movement of the King Xian sword, it had allowed Xianxia to instantly and coincidentally obtain the chance for this energy of the grand Tao to enter into his body, so his own comprehensions and cultivation naturally benefited greatly from it and improved along with it. Rumble. Divine energy surged and circulated throughout the universe within his body while his divine Tao seethed and was ceaselessly tempered and improved. This entire process continued for a few hours. When Xianxia opened his eyes again, he seemed as if he'd been completely reconstructed. The meridians and apertures within his body were enshrouded with divine light, while even his bones were suffused with bright golden light, and they vividly displayed the miracles of divinity. Especially his talisman divine Tao, it was actually only a thread away from stepping into the advanced stage from the initial stage. The cultivation stages in the divine Tao were divided into the basic stage, initial stage, advanced stage, peak stage, and perfection stage. The advancement up to every single stage was extremely difficult and obscure, and it was comparable to how difficult it was for an ordinary person to ascend into the heavens. Normally speaking, universe-enlightened ancestral gods could be considered to be astounding by being able to temper their divine Tao to the advanced stage. But at most times, universe-enlightened ancestral god realm experts were still only able to possess a cultivation in the divine Tao at the initial stage. Yet now, Xianxia had actually accomplished such a comprehension in the divine Tao while possessing a cultivation that had attained perfection in the domain-enlightened spirit god realm. Could already be considered as world-shocking. No matter how outstanding a domain-enlightened spirit god's natural talent was, it was absolutely impossible to accomplish this without great fortune. I never expected that I would actually profit from misfortune while traversing this test, and it allowed my strength to improve greatly. Xianxia sensed the change in his vital energy, and he couldn't help but exclaim with shock in his heart. However, he was clearly aware that all of this was definitely related to Xian. If he didn't possess the assistance of Xian's King Xian sword, then Xianxia would absolutely be unable to encounter such a fortuitous encounter. Not to mention that this place was Xian's residence and place of cultivation all those years ago. Xianxia took a deep breath before he stood up and moved forward once more. Unlike before, even though he was still enduring terrifying pressure from the surroundings at all times, Xianxia didn't feel fearful any longer. It was even to the extent that he was able to clearly sense that after he tempered and reconstructed himself to the point his strength increased, he seemed to be able to traverse this path in a much more confident and calm manner. The path was boundless and seemingly endless. It just happened to be like the path of cultivation, and it was impossible to find where the end was. Without him realizing it, another 3 days had passed. Xianxia felt a strand of extremely terrifying pressure again, and the energy of the grand Tao that filled the path grew ever stronger. Bang! Suddenly, an ethereal spirit floated up into appearance ahead. It was 30 kilometers tall and covered in strands of violet lightning. As soon as it appeared, it let out a loud roar, and then it suddenly charged towards Xianxia. This was a force that was born from within the grand Tao of lightning, and it had been condensed into form. It had transformed into the might of the gods, and it intended to obstruct Xianxia's path. Xianxia's eyes narrowed, and he couldn't help but be shocked in his heart. The energy of the grand Tao actually possesses intelligence of its own. Isn't this a bit too terrifying? Bang! He withdrew the talisman armament to resist the spirit. However, after merely a single collision, he was shaken to the point the vital blood in his entire body surged, and he staggered back while almost coughing up blood. This caused Xianxia to be shocked once more. He'd once fought the sovereign sex Yen, who was at the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, and the attack of this ethereal lightning spirit before him was simply no different from a universe-enlightened ancestral god. How could it be so formidable? Before Xianxia could recover from his shock, that lightning spirit had attacked once more. It controlled lightning and transformed it into blades, spears, swords, halberds, pagoda, mountains, seals. It was even to the extent that it even condensed a lightning city that smashed down ferociously at Xianxia and intended to crush him into powder. On the other hand, during this entire process, Xianxia didn't have the strength to resist even with his current combat strength. He was struck to the point of coughing up blood, while the bones in his entire body had almost been struck to the point of falling apart. He was in an extremely sorry state. It was too formidable. If this lightning spirit born from within the grand Tao of lightning was a universe-enlightened ancestral god, then it was absolutely a first-rate existence in the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm. Xianxia grumbled in his heart. Isn't the test in this door of the grand Tao too abnormal? Even a universe-enlightened ancestral god would probably be unable to resist such a test, right? No wonder that from the ancient times until now, no one has been able to seize that imperial sovereign Tao root. With such a harsh and brutal test standing before it, could any domain-enlightened spirit god be able to traverse the test and arrive before it? Rumble! Lightning surged and transformed into an ocean of lightning, and then it assaulted Xianxia. Clang! Xianxia withdrew the copper coin of Treasurefall. However, it hardly produced any effects, because the lightning spirit was formed from the energy of the grand Tao, and it didn't possess a physical body. So, No matter how formidable the copper coin of Treasurefall was, it was actually unable to do anything to the lightning spirit. After that, Xianxia withdrew the overarching heaven net. This treasure was said to be even able to capture the karmic luck of the heaven Tao and the traces of the grand Tao. If it was still unable to produce any effects, then Xianxia would truly be helpless against it. Swish! The large net that was chilly and illusory soared into the sky, and it instantly wrapped around the lightning spirit. This allowed Xianxia to heave a sigh of relief, and he was clearly aware that he'd found the right method. However, before he could feel delighted, his entire body shook. The lightning spirit had actually shaken its entire body and struggled free from the overarching heaven net's restraints in one go. Xianxia suffered backlash because of this, and he suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood while his countenance turned pale. Damn it! Xianxia's expression turned gloomy. If I'm defeated, then my mission would have failed completely. But exactly how should I deal with this danger that stands before me? Rumble. The lightning spirit walked over with large strides, and it didn't lighten its suppression towards Xianxia at all. Clang! At this instant, Xianxia suddenly gritted his teeth and withdrew the King Xian's sword that floated in his sea of consciousness before slashing with it. He was unable to think of any other way, so he could only give the King Xian sword a try. If it failed as well, then he could only turn around immediately and flee. OM! A shocking scene appeared. As soon as the bloody, damaged sword appeared, obscure droplets of light drifted out from it. Swish! It slashed the lightning spirit into two with a single strike, and it was simply as easy as tearing apart a piece of paper or blowing off dust. Rumble! The lightning spirit formed from the grand Tao of lightning was slashed into two beneath the might of this sword strike, and its entire 30 kilometers tall figure suddenly transformed into a rain of light that vanished into nothingness. Xianxia was instantly stunned. He gazed at the damaged King Xian's sword in his hand, and he was extremely shocked in his heart. He'd never imagined that while this sword was clearly damaged and mottled with rust, it was able to exert such terrifying might. If he knew this sword possessed such miraculous ability since the beginning, then how could he have had such a hard time to advance all along the way here? Xianxia went silent for a moment before he took a deep breath, and then he put the talisman armament away and utilized the damaged King Xian's sword instead. After that, he continued forward on the path. After a short moment, a spirit formed from the energy of the star Grand Tao surged into appearance. It controlled numerous stars, and it was like the ruler of the universe as it shot explosively towards Xianxia. This spirit was even more terrifying than the lightning spirit from before. Its entire body was suffused by the aura of the star Grand Tao, and it was like numerous stars were smashing down towards him. Merely the oppressive, imposing aura it possessed caused Xianxia's entire body to stiffen, and he was practically on the verge of suffocating. If nothing unexpected happened, then he would definitely suffer calamity and be blasted flying by this strike. However, the damaged King Xian sword in Xianxia's hand shook at this moment. It carried a strand of obscure radiance and actually instantly crushed all this pressure into pieces. King Xian. Why is Xian still in this world? At this moment, the spirit actually let out a sharp cry, and it seemed to be terrified to the limit. It actually possesses intelligence and memories. Xianxia was shocked in his heart, and he had a deeper feeling that this place was extraordinary. He didn't hesitate to slash his sword towards it. Unfortunately, this spirit condensed from the star Grand Tao seemed to have noticed that the situation was bad, and it instantly vanished on the spot. It had actually fled and didn't dare obstruct Xianxia. As expected, everything here is definitely closely related to Xian. Xianxia was even confident of his deduction when he saw this. Swoosh! Xianxia circulated his cultivation, and he held the damaged King Xian's sword in hand and slashed with it while moving forward. He instantly noticed that all the pressure that existed on this path was easily crushed into pieces and were completely dispersed. They couldn't obstruct him at all any longer. It simply felt no different than traversing flat ground, and it was extremely easy. At practically the exact same moment, Xianxia noticed that while he advanced with the damaged King Xian sword in hand, he actually didn't encounter the obstruction of any spirits formed from the energy of the Grand Tao. It wasn't just that. During this entire process, Even though the pressure from the energy of the Grand Tao had been crushed into pieces, it didn't disperse, and it transformed into drops of light that were easily absorbed by him instead. They were converted into the energy of his own divine Tao, and it seemed to be extremely miraculous. This caused Xianxia to be shocked in his heart again. He couldn't help but guess if the door of the Grand Tao was personally sealed by Xian all those years ago. If it wasn't for that, how could I possibly obtain such good fortune at this moment? Swish! Swish! No matter what Xianxia thought, all along the way, all the pieces of the aura of the Grand Tao had been absorbed by him, and he converted them into a part of his own cultivation in the divine Tao. Wasn't all of this a great fortuitous encounter as well? Later on, Xianxia felt as if his entire body was on the verge of being filled by the aura of the Grand Tao, and he had a feeling of being full and on the verge of exploding. However, to Xianxia's disbelief, even under such circumstances, his cultivation in the divine Tao at the initial stage was still unable to step foot into the advanced stage. It just a thread away from breakthrough, yet it was like a natural chasm that lay before it, and this allowed Xianxia to instantly understand that even though he possessed sufficient energy of the divine Tao, he lacked a critical factor to break through. This sort of critical factor couldn't be replaced by quantity alone, and it required comprehension. When he understood this, Xianxia paid no further attention to all of this, and he continued advancing step by step. Actually, at this moment, no matter if it was his cultivation in qi refinement or comprehension of the Tao, both of them had attained a full state. In other words, the strength he possessed had already arrived at the limits of the domain enlightened spirit God realm, and if he wanted to break through, then he only had a single path: advance into the universe enlightened ancestral God realm. Otherwise, no matter how he continued cultivating, it would truly be difficult for him to improve by even a trace. This was a form of common knowledge in the cultivation world, and Xianxia was extremely clearly aware of it. It was even to the extent that he was clearly aware that amongst the cultivators in the domain enlightened spirit God realm, it was practically impossible to find anyone else that could rival him. However, what happened next exceeded Xianxia's expectations, because as he advanced all along the way, even though his qi refinement cultivation and comprehension of the Tao had arrived at a bottleneck, the divine Tao altar that floated in his soul was gradually undergoing a transformation. Domain enlightened spirit gods were existences that had established a divine Tao altar in their souls. According to the amount of divine altar spirit lights emanated by the divine Tao altar, cultivators at the domain enlightened spirit God realm were divided into various different ranks. For example, the divine Tao altar Xianxia established possessed 9 divine altar spirit lights, so he possessed the potential of a spirit God exalt. This was the most supreme potential one could possess within the domain enlightened spirit God realm. For example, the experts at the top 100 positions of the domain enlightened chart were all spirit God exalts that had established divine Tao altars which possessed 9 divine altar spirit lights. The reason there was a difference in their ranking was entirely because of the gap in their overall combat strength. Simply speaking, existences that possessed 9 divine altar spirit lights had already stepped foot into the extremes of the domain enlightened spirit God realm, and they were exalted existences. However, at this moment, as Xianxia constantly absorbed strand after strand of the energy of the Grand Tao, the 9 spirit lights that suffused the divine Tao altar which floated in Xianxia's soul had actually showed signs of fusing together. The 9 spirit lights were divided into the colors of crimson, orange, yellow, pine green, dark blue, indigo, violet, black, and white. They were completely different, acted in cooperation with each other from afar, and resided in the surroundings of the divine Tao altar within his soul. This was the potential of a spirit God exalt. Yet now, the 9 divine altar spirit lights on Xianxia's divine Tao altar were gradually fusing, and along with the passage of time, they were faintly on the verge of becoming a single whole. 9 were converging back into one. At this moment, these 9 spirit lights showed signs of convergence. Even with Xianxia's current knowledge, he was unable to distinguish exactly what these changes meant, but it was undoubtable that along with the emergence of this change, he was able to clearly sense that his soul was strengthening without end, and his senses, will, and even vital energy were obtaining enormous benefits. Actually, to put it simply, this was a form of transformation of the soul. It was a form of evolution of one's own foundation in the Grand Tao. Moreover, this sort of breakthrough had already exceeded the scope of a spirit god exalt. At this moment, even Xianxia couldn't help but feel excited, and a wisp of hope arose in his heart. Exactly how much would my combat strength be able to improve by after this transformation is completed? Over 10 days have passed now. Why has there been no news at all? There's no need to be anxious. Didn't you notice that Luo Xiaonong's group hasn't returned as well? Perhaps this proves that Xianxia hasn't suffered misfortune yet. If it's really like that, then Xianxia is truly too extraordinary. He's all by himself after all, yet he's actually able to persist until now. I really wonder exactly where this fellow came from. Do you remember that I once mentioned Wang Jianxin from 8,000 years ago? His name was not on the domain enlightened chart as well, yet his sword shocked the world, and no one in the Imperial Region's Tao Institute could stop him. Later on, he was addressed respectfully as the Sword Demon. Xianxia isn't much inferior when compared to Wang Jianxin from all those years ago. So, could it be that Xianxia might become a second Wang Jianxin? No, every single person has their own path. Xianxia is Xianxia, and Wang Jianxin is Wang Jianxin. But without a doubt, both of them are peerless figures that unknown to the world. In the hall, Lu Wuhan, Shinta Yanran, Yu Qiujing, and Zhuanyu Shui were waiting silently while chatting in low voices, and they couldn't help but sigh with emotion when Xianxia was mentioned. None of them had expected that this young man who joined their group midway would actually reveal such dazzling light in the desolate Mancha ruins. He was simply like a comet that tore through the sky and caused others to be unable to not catch sight of him. Swoosh! While they chatted, a figure suddenly flashed into the hall. In an instant, that figure arrived before the door that lead to the paths of the Grand Tao. He wore a moon-white monk's robe and straw sandals, and he held a cane made out of withered wood. His expression was calm and tranquil, and his entire body was suffused by a firm, composed, and peaceful aura. Shockingly, it was Jianan who was ranked at the 7th position on the Domain Enlightened chart. 10 days after Xianxia entered the door of the Grand Tao, he'd actually arrived by himself at this moment, and he seemed as if he actually intended to step into the door of the Grand Tao as well. Lu Wuhan and the others couldn't help but be stunned by this scene. He has arrived so late. So, even if he sets out now, he would probably be far from being able to compete with Luo Xiaonong's group and Xianxia. Why does he still refuse to give up? Yu Qiujing couldn't help but cry out. Jianan, you don't have a chance any longer. Please step back. Fate is determined by the heavens, and all fate is predetermined. So, how could there be any difference between being early and late? Jianan spoke calmly and didn't even look back. But, that's the door of the Grand Tao, and it's filled with killing intent. Yu Qiujing frowned as he spoke. Thank you for the reminder, fellow Taoist. Even though Jianan said this, his figure took a step forward and instantly vanished behind the door. The members of the Buddhist sect really are stubborn and impenetrable. Yu Qiujing shook his head lightheartedly. Don't underestimate him. Amongst the numerous powers in the Imperial region, the Buddhist sect is even more mysterious than Oracle Mountain. Its disciples practically never step foot into the world. If Jianan wasn't seeking the path to discover his true self, then he would probably have not stepped foot out of the sect. His ranking seems to be inferior to Luo Xiaonong, but his true strength can't be underestimated at all. Lu Wuhan had a serious expression, and he revealed a wisp of a solemn expression. Perhaps, he'll become a formidable enemy of Xianxia's. As soon as these words were spoken, the hearts of everyone shook, and they couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Behind the door of the Grand Tao, Jianan stood silently before his own path for a long time, and then a wisp of a grin arose on his indifferent and firm face. He knew that he'd arrived just in time, and he wasn't late. After that, he utilized the withered wood cane in his hand and pressed his hands together before bowing slightly. He praised Buddha in a sincere and serious manner before he took a stride and started to move forward. Buddha be praised. Buddha be praised. Buddha be praised. Wave after wave of boundlessly grand chanting swept towards the surroundings like golden ripples, and on the other hand, Numerous white jade lotus platforms arose beneath Jianan's feet. They ceaselessly bloomed and seethed with strands of divine radiance that carried a holy aura. He strode atop these lotus platforms and moved like flowing water as he flashed swiftly towards the depths of the path. From the beginning until the end, he actually seemed to have not suffered any obstruction at all. If such a scene was witnessed by Lu Wuhan and the others, they would definitely not dare to believe their eyes.